The hot June morning of 2021 began with an unusual commotion on Stewart Street, right in the heart of Carson City, Nevada. 7 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of the 2-story building of the Carson Fire Station, a place far more accustomed to the sound of fire engine sirens than police footsteps. Neighbors in the area peeked through their curtains as tactically geared officers moved in an organized manner, positioning themselves around the area as if in a carefully prepared operation. Inside, 41-year-old Ryan Talbot was brewing his morning coffee, a habit he had maintained for nearly 2 decades as a dedicated firefighter, a trusted colleague, and a familiar face in the Carson community. A loud and insistent knock sounded at exactly 7:32 a.m. Ryan Talbot, Nevada Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 2007 disappearance of Emily Hartfield." The officers later described how Ryan's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee cup, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had been waiting for this moment for the past 14 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Late afternoon on November 21, 2007, Fallon, a small desert town in Nevada, was bathed in the cold, dim light before Thanksgiving. 27-year-old Emily Hartfield, an EMT technician at Carson Plains Medical, finished her shift early to head back to her father's house. More than 8 months pregnant, she moved slowly but stuck to her regular routine, stopping at the grocery store near Highway 50 to pick up a few items, checking her prenatal appointment for the next day, and calling her sister Sarah at 5:17 p.m. to let her know she had arrived home safely. The conversation was brief, mostly about the heavy feeling in her belly and the final preparations before giving birth. While talking, Emily looked out the living room window and paused for a few seconds, as if noticing something familiar. Sarah later recalled that her sister said someone had just pulled into the driveway, a familiar silver pickup truck, and that she would call back later. That was the last time anyone heard Emily's voice. According to a neighbor living across the street, around 5:25 p.m., they saw the headlights of a silver pickup truck turn on in the Hartfield driveway, and then turn off, and the figure of a man in a long coat standing on the front porch for a few minutes. There was no loud noise, no sign of a struggle audible outside. Just a brief moment that later became the final crucial piece of evidence before Emily vanished. A little over an hour later, when Sarah didn't receive the expected call back, she started sending texts and calling repeatedly, but no one answered. By nearly 7 p.m., Emily's phone was still ringing with no pickup, completely out of character for her, especially so close to giving birth. Sarah contacted their father, Daniel Hartfield, who said he hadn't seen Emily in her room or anywhere in the house since leaving work. With a growing sense of unease, the two decided to drive over immediately. When they arrived, the living room light was still on. Emily's car was parked in the driveway, but the front door was ajar. They called her name repeatedly, walking through the living room, kitchen, and hallway, but the entire house was suffocatingly silent. Everything was in place, with no signs of preparation to leave or taking personal items. In those tense few minutes, Sarah became convinced that her sister could not have left the house on her own, in her advanced pregnancy, without telling the family. After one final check of the entire house yielding no sign that Emily had left voluntarily, Sarah stepped out to the front yard and called 911, her voice trembling as she reported that Emily Hartfield, 8 months pregnant, had disappeared under suspicious circumstances and might be in danger. The call was logged at the Fallon Emergency Dispatch Center, and just 8 minutes later, 2 assigned officers, Patrol Officer Keegan and Officer Miller, arrived at the house on Stillwater Avenue, approaching the scene according to standard procedure for a missing adult report, as there was not yet enough evidence to elevate the alert level due to no clear signs of violence or criminal activity. However, the initial dispatch note about the victim's pregnancy made them more cautious than usual. After confirming the house posed no immediate threat, they invited Sarah and Mr. Daniel out to the front porch to gather preliminary information. The last time contact was made her schedule that day, Emily's health, and any factors that might suggest voluntary departure. Both family members firmly stated that Emily had no history of running away, no family conflicts, no mental health issues, and especially would never leave without her phone or notifying someone, made even more critical by her nearing due date. This information was noted in the initial report, leading Officer Keegan to flag the case as missing adult, high-risk consideration. The two officers quickly checked the entire exterior grounds, following paths to the backyard, peering at the side door, and noting no signs of forced entry or struggle. Emily's car was still parked in its spot, doors locked, with no unusual tire tracks visible on the dry gravel. Back on the porch, they continued with more detailed questioning. Sarah provided the last call time, 5:17 p.m. Mr. Daniel noted he left the house around 4:50 p.m. and returned at 6:40 p.m., but saw no sign of Emily. Neither knew anything about the man or the silver pickup the neighbor had seen. The officers recorded all these timelines into the record, forming the last known timeline. After compiling the timeline, Officer Keegan immediately contacted Fallon Dispatch to check for any traffic accident reports near Highway 50 or Carson Highway between 5 and 8 p.m., while also requesting a quick review of the town's rare public traffic cameras. Meanwhile, Officer Miller went through the rooms again with Sarah to confirm what items were left behind. Cell phone on the table, keys on the shelf near the door, wallet in her purse on the chair, and maternity coat still hanging on the hook. Nearly every piece of evidence pointed to Emily not preparing to leave the house. At this stage, they could not legally classify the case as in danger, but the unusual scene, combined with the pregnancy and prolonged loss of contact, prompted Keegan to recommend involving a dedicated missing persons investigator. 34 minutes after the report was filed, Detective Laura Mendez of Fallon PD arrived at the scene. With 11 years of experience, Mendez began the risk assessment process, asking categorizing questions: possibility of voluntary departure, history of depression, any friends or acquaintances she might go to, recent conflicts or pressure on the victim. After hearing the full account from the family, Mendez concluded Emily fell into the high-risk missing category under 2007 standards. Late-stage pregnancy, sudden disappearance, no essential items taken, and evidence of interaction with an unidentified individual just before vanishing. She quickly established an official timeline with 4 key points: last contact by Emily, neighbor's sighting of the strange vehicle, father's return home, and family calling police. This timeline was marked as the core document for the entire initial investigation phase. By around 9:30 p.m., Mendez reported back to headquarters, recommending the case be elevated to high-risk missing person, active. Fallon PD immediately approved and directed the next steps, canvassing nearby witnesses and gathering information on the silver pickup seen in front of Emily's house. Upon receiving the directive, Detective Laura Mendez began the first step that evening of November 21, 2007, canvassing all households within a 2-block radius of Emily Hartfield's address. Fallon being a small town with houses not too far apart, and most residents knowing each other, the process moved relatively quickly. Mendez started with the house across the street, where the neighbor had provided the initial key information during Sarah's 911 call. The middle-aged woman there recounted the sighting between 5:25 and 5:30 p.m. It was already dark, but Emily's porch light was on, making it easy to see a silver pickup parked close to the edge of the driveway. She said the man walking up the steps appeared tall and broad, wearing a dark long coat that seemed to have a shield-shaped logo on it, though she couldn't be sure due to the distance. When asked if she heard any shouting or banging, she confirmed there was none. Everything was completely quiet. Mendez noted this detail because such unusual silence in a brief encounter typically doesn't suggest threat, but it also didn't rule out something happening inside the house that neighbors couldn't hear. 2 other officers assisting Mendez split up the nearby homes. At the second house to the right of Emily's, an elderly couple said they only noticed headlights flash for a few seconds, but didn't pay attention to the vehicle color or driver. However, they confirmed the truck didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood, as there were only 12 long-term resident families, and none owned a silver pickup to their knowledge. Mendez recorded this, as it helped narrow the search. At the third house behind the property, a 19-year-old young man said he saw the truck from afar, while walking home from the end of the street. He clearly remembered it wasn't a lifted off-road type common in the desert area, but a standard pickup with a low bed, mid-2000s model, possibly a Chevrolet Silverado or Ford F-150. Mendez considered this valuable for narrowing vehicle types. Back at Fallon PD headquarters near 11 p.m., Mendez compiled a list of all collected descriptions: silver color, low bed, roughly 2004, 2007 model year, bright headlights, no special decals or stickers, and likely from outside the neighborhood. She submitted a request to the Nevada DMV to filter the list of silver pickups in the two most common models registered in the Fallon, Carson Plains area. Initial DMV estimates indicated over 400 silver pickups registered in Churchill and Carson counties, but narrowing by model, travel area, and activity time on the afternoon of November 21st could significantly reduce the number when cross-referenced with shift workers or people connected to Emily. While awaiting the official DMV response, Mendez decided to tap local sources. She contacted the Carson City Fire Station because one witness mentioned the man's coat, possibly having a shield logo, a design commonly used by fire departments. The on-duty crew confirmed that Carson City firefighters wore thick navy blue and black jackets with a gold and red shield logo. However, they noted over 40 personnel in the unit used similar jackets, so the information was only directional. More notably, Carson Fire Station confirmed that many firefighters in the Fallon, Carson area used pickups as personal vehicles, with many choosing silver for availability and suitability to the terrain. Mendez requested the Carson Fire Administrative Department to compile a list of personnel owning silver pickups. The initial list returned had 14 people out of 43 employees. Of these 14, 2 lived east of Carson, 3 in Mound House, 5 in the Fallon Plains area, 2 in Dayton, and 2 in Carson City itself. From this list, Mendez began cross-checking shift schedules. A request was sent to verify who was absent from the afternoon-evening shift on November 21st. Only one person had unexpectedly called off that day. That person's name, Ryan Talbot. This was the first time the name appeared in the case file, but Mendez did not jump to conclusions. She simply flagged his name for priority checking. Next, Mendez reviewed Ryan's residential address record and saw that he lived on the outskirts of Carson City, only about an hour's drive from Fallon, fully consistent with witness descriptions and appearing in the Hartfield neighborhood during the victim's disappearance window. At this point, Mendez had completed the initial witness verification phase. All neighbors agreed the vehicle at Emily's house was unfamiliar and not local. Descriptions of color and style matched a common pickup type, and the detail about the man's coat, possibly linked to firefighting, further narrowed the suspect pool. When the data was compiled, the likely subject group shrank to working-age men who owned silver pickups, regularly traveled between Fallon and Carson, and could wear firefighter uniforms. From that short list, Detective Laura Mendez began the next screening step, cross-referencing each vehicle owner with the witness descriptions and assessing whether they could have been in Fallon between 5 and 6 p.m. on November 21, 2007. The initial list of 14 people quickly narrowed as those with clear alibis were eliminated. Some were on duty, in training, or assigned to tasks in Carson City at the time. 3 others were verified to be out of state. 1 was on leave in Reno with family, and 6 were confirmed by colleagues to be present at Carson Fire Station during their shift. After exclusions, the list was left with only one name who could not account for his whereabouts during the time Emily disappeared: Ryan Talbot. Verification showed that Talbot had called in to request the afternoon shift off, citing personal matters to attend to, a detail that prompted Mendez to scrutinize him further. From there, she moved to analyzing his personnel file. Ryan Talbot, 32 years old. a firefighter MT with the Carson City Fire Department since 2001, no criminal record, no serious internal violations, and strong professional evaluations. His personnel file indicated he lived alone in a rented apartment in Carson City, no spouse or children, and no recorded direct connections to Fallon in the past 3 years beyond. Assisting with a wildfire on the outskirts of Fallon in 2005. The only notable point was that Ryan and Emily had briefly attended the same community college in 2004, both taking a basic EMT course, though school records did not indicate they were in the same study group or discussion section. Mendez noted this information because it opened the possibility they had known each other to some extent, though it was not enough to confirm a current relationship. The next morning, November 22, she contacted Carson Fire to arrange for Ryan to come to Fallon PD for a voluntary interview as a person potentially connected to the missing person case. Carson Fire confirmed that Ryan had been notified and agreed to arrive in Fallon at 10 a.m. In the witness interview room, Mendez started with standard questions to establish a timeline. Ryan stated he left Carson City around 4:30 p.m. to go to Fallon to discuss a personal matter with Emily. Arriving at her house around 5:15 p.m. He said the meeting lasted no more than 10 minutes, mostly revolving around clarifying some unresolved issues, but he did not go into details. Ryan claimed he left Emily's house around 5:30 p.m. and drove straight back to Carson City. When asked if anyone could confirm the time he left Fallon, Ryan replied that he was alone and did not stop anywhere else. Mendez asked him to describe the exact route back to Carson, his average speed, the time he arrived home, and what he did afterward. Ryan said he took Highway 50, arrived in Carson around 6:20 or 6:30 p.m., and stayed home the rest of the evening. When asked if he knew Emily was missing, Ryan said he had no idea and didn't notice anything unusual when he left. Mendez then shifted to questions about the nature of his relationship with Emily. Ryan admitted, knowing Emily from the 2004 EMT class, that they had stayed in occasional contact and had met a few times recently, but denied any romantic relationship. When asked why he went to see Emily that specific afternoon, Ryan only said there was something to discuss related to a misunderstanding, but provided no further details. Although Ryan's statement contained no direct contradictions, Mendez noted several concerning points. First, he could not provide clear alibi evidence from the time he left Fallon until he returned to Carson. Second, the timeline he provided, leaving Fallon at 5:30 p.m., and arriving in Carson before 6:30 p.m., did not match the average nearly 1-hour drive in dark conditions. Third, he avoided details about the personal matter, while the existence of the silver pickup truck and the neighbor's sighting of him perfectly matched Emily's last known appearance. Mendez recorded all the times Ryan provided: 4:30 p.m. departure from Carson, 5:15 p.m. arrival in Fallon, 5:25, 5:30 p.m. departure from Emily's house, 6:20 p.m. arrival back in Carson. She cross-referenced these times against the timeline she was building with evidence from family and witnesses. At the conclusion of the interview, Ryan was still classified as a voluntary witness, not yet a suspect, but his vague statements and avoidance of explaining the purpose of the visit placed him on the list for close monitoring and subsequent investigative steps. Immediately afterward, Detective Laura Mendez left headquarters and returned to Emily's house to coordinate with the Churchill County Search and Rescue Team, which had been on standby since the previous evening, but could not fully deploy due to lack of clear information about the last known point. With the timeline provided by Ryan and the unverified gaps in time, Mendez directed SAR to begin searching the immediate area under the high-risk missing protocol applied to cases of missing pregnant women. The SR team divided into 3 small groups. Group 1 swept the entire front yard, backyard, and bushes along the fence. Group 2 checked the dirt trails running along the Stillwater Avenue residential area. Group 3 expanded the search toward the open field, where a side path led to a secondary road connecting to Highway 50. Mendez ordered an initial search radius of about 500–700 meters around the house, based on the possibility the victim might have left on foot in an emergency. However, she remained cautious, since most signs from the scene indicated Emily did not leave voluntarily. Group 1 started at the back door of the house, noting no signs of forced entry, no drag marks or unusual footprints on the ground. The sandy soil in the backyard was fairly soft due to the automatic sprinkler system, so any struggle or dragging would likely leave traces for at least a few hours. However, the ground was completely smooth with no signs of disturbance. Group 2 handled the Eastern Trail, a narrow path locals in Fallon often used for walking toward the Stillwater Marsh. The trail was narrow and likely to show footprints if a pregnant woman had passed, especially on the dry, sandy soil. However, after nearly an hour of searching, the team only found old, indistinct footprints that did not match the gender or timing of Emily's last sighting. Group 3 checked the area near the secondary road leading to Highway 50, where locals often park temporarily. This area was considered important because if someone had taken Emily by vehicle, this was the most logical escape route. A coordination team used ATVs to slowly scan the dirt surface for fresh tire tracks, but Fallon has a high number of pickup trucks, and overlapping tracks made it impossible to identify any new ones from November 21st. While the three groups conducted their sweeps, Mendez requested deployment of the K9 unit to track Emily's scent around the house. The tracking dog Rex was brought to the front door, where witnesses had seen the man and the pickup truck. Initially, Rex followed the scent to the porch, circled the front yard, then headed straight to the edge of the road where the truck was believed to have been parked. However, at the point near the curb, the scent trail ended completely, not extending to any walking paths or the backyard. This was significant. If Emily had left voluntarily on foot or been led away on foot, Rex would have continued following the scent along paths or grass. The fact that the scent stopped right at the road strongly suggested the victim had gotten into or been placed in a vehicle. Mendez marked this as the first preliminary conclusion based on field data. After completing the initial search circle, SAR conducted a second sweep of easily overlooked areas, corners of the house, behind the shed, old construction material storage, and shallow drainage ditches near the back road. Some wind-blown desert debris was collected for elimination. None belonged to Emily. No blood traces, fabric fibers, or personal items were found in the immediate area. Mendez also requested documentation of environmental disturbance, leaves, sand, passerby footprints. Everything was in a natural state, except for footprints from witnesses, police, and a SAR that occurred after the report. By mid-morning, SAR shifted to checking the broader neighborhood, knocking on doors 3 to 4 blocks away for anyone who might have seen the pickup truck from another angle. Though a few thought they saw vehicle headlights or a silhouette, no one provided new verifiable information. In the mid-morning report summary, the SAR team leader reached a temporary conclusion: no evidence Emily left the house on foot, no signs of struggle, no evidence of injury within the 500-700-meter radius. The only conclusion that could be drawn from the search data was that the victim left by vehicle. Mendez immediately noted this in the investigation file, marking it likely vehicular departure. The K9 results and scene data indicated the departure direction likely followed the road where the silver pickup was parked. With this conclusion, the investigation scope began expanding beyond the residential area, focusing on routes leading to Highway 50, the most feasible direction for the mysterious vehicle that appeared during the window of Emily's disappearance. After the SR team completed the immediate area search and concluded that Emily most likely left the house by vehicle, Detective Laura Mendez refocused on examining the interior of the house, a step that could not be delayed since assessing voluntary departure versus being taken depended on comparing the scene to Emily's daily habits. Mendez coordinated with the crime scene technician unit to fully document the scene under Fallon PD protocol, photographing the entire area, noting object positions, marking potential evidence areas, and creating a floor plan diagram. The first step was establishing the condition of the front door. No signs of prying hinges intact, lock undamaged. This aligned with witness data that Emily had opened the door for the man who arrived around 5:25 p.m. Examination of the living room showed no broken objects, no signs of a struggle, and Emily's personal items were in their usual places as confirmed by family. On the table next to the sofa, Emily's cell phone was still plugged into its charger. By habit, she rarely left the phone at home, even for a few minutes, if going out. Her wallet was in her purse on the opposite chair, containing all identification, bank cards, and $46 in cash, further confirming she was not prepared to go far. Her maternity coat was still hanging on the hook, despite outdoor temperatures around 40 degrees Fahrenheit at the time, something no near-term pregnant woman would overlook if leaving the house. In the kitchen, Mendez checked the refrigerator, sink, and stove to see if Emily had been in the middle of preparing food or showed signs of planning to go out. No food was cooking, no recently used dishes, and the grocery bags from her afternoon shopping were still untouched on the table. This indicated she had not started any activities after returning home. Emily's bedroom was thoroughly checked. The bed was neatly made. The hospital go bag was partially open but untouched. If she had left voluntarily to meet someone or for an emergency, at least some essential items from the bag would be missing. No clothes pulled from the closet, no suitcase, no carry bag. The vanity showed her evening routine had not begun. Personal care items were undisturbed. Mendez checked the bathroom and noted dry towels, heater off. Signs Emily had not prepared to go out as usual, since, according to her sister Sarah, Emily always washed her face, put on her coat, and took a water bottle before stepping out each evening. Cross-referencing all data, Mendez flagged 3 key groups of evidence. Group 1 included items Emily would never leave behind: phone, coat, wallet. Group 2 included items showing she had not started any post-return activities: untouched groceries, unused kitchen. Group 3 included personal habit details: hospital bag untouched, bedroom undisturbed. Nothing suggested voluntary departure. Combined with SAR data, the scent trail stopping at the curb, not extending to walking paths, and the silver pickup's appearance, Mendez concluded Emily very likely left the house in a non-voluntary or unprepared state. The crime scene technician continued dusting for fingerprints on likely contact surfaces, but in the initial phase, only recorded prints belonging to Emily, Mr. Daniel, and faint inanalyzable marks on the door handle. All items were photographed, documented, and sealed per 2007 protocol, then transferred to Fallon PD evidence storage. At the end of the examination, Mendez completed the scene report and submitted a request to upgrade the case from missing adult, high-risk consideration, to suspicious missing person, meaning a disappearance with abnormal signs and likely external intervention. This upgrade allowed expanded investigative authorities, including requesting travel records for individuals near the scene and continuing to screen suspect vehicles leaving the area at the time Emily was last seen. Thus, with the possibility of voluntary departure fully ruled out, the investigation officially entered the phase of evaluating external factors related to Emily Hartfield's disappearance. After ruling out the possibility that Emily left home voluntarily and confirming that the scene showed numerous unusual signs, Detective Laura Mendez shifted her focus to analyzing personal relationships, one of the top priorities in missing persons cases involving pregnant women. Mendez began by requesting the family to provide information about all close acquaintances, past and current relationships, and anyone Emily had interacted with in the past 2 months. Sarah stated that Emily did not have an official boyfriend, but had mentioned being pressured by an old acquaintance, and also noted the possibility that this person was the father of the baby, but refused to be involved in the pregnancy. When Mendez directly asked whether that person was Ryan Talbot, the family hesitated but did not deny that Emily had mentioned a man who worked in the fire service. Sarah recalled that in recent weeks, Emily often seemed stressed after receiving texts or calls from the old acquaintance, but she did not share specifics because she feared being misunderstood or worrying the family. Mr. Daniel also confirmed that he had seen Emily turn off her phone screen when a call came in and simply say it's just old unfinished business. A detail that Mendez immediately flagged because it shared many similarities with cases involving conflicts over pregnancy responsibility. Mendez continued by interviewing Emily's close friends, including 2 EMT coworkers and 1 friend from the same EMT class in 2004. All 3 stated that Emily had mentioned that the man wanted to avoid involvement with the baby and had suggested she handle it herself, which hurt Emily and led her to cut contact for a while. However, recently, he had unexpectedly reached out again more frequently, saying he needed to talk in person, a detail that matched the timing of Ryan's stated visit to Fallon to meet Emily. One coworker said Emily had confided that the man did not want his family, friends, or colleagues to know about her pregnancy, and certainly did not want a long-term commitment. This raised suspicions about the potential for strong conflict and psychological pressure between the two in the period leading up to the disappearance. Mendez reviewed Ryan's background file for comparison. He was single, with no family obligations, working in a high-pressure environment, characteristics that matched many cases of potential fathers evading pregnancy responsibility in missing pregnant women cases. She also noted that Ryan had requested time off from his shift on the exact day Emily disappeared and could not provide clear alibi evidence for the critical time window of 5:30, 6:30 p.m. This was a very important factor in the stage of assessing the possibility of foul play by an acquaintance. To further strengthen this, Mendez asked the family to check Emily's recent texts, emails, or notes. Sarah provided some emails from October, showing that Emily had tried in good faith to maintain contact so the baby could have a chance at having a father, but the responses from the other person were often cold, evasive, and sometimes pressuring. In the most recent email, Emily wrote that she didn't want more stress and just needed to talk once and then stop, indicating she was mentally preparing to end it completely. Mendez noted that this was the type of relationship prone to impulsive behavior if one party wanted to end it while the other wanted to keep it secret. The investigation also showed that Emily had no conflicts with any coworkers, neighbors, or family members. There were no financial issues, legal disputes, or other complicated relationships beyond the pregnancy matter. This significantly narrowed the scope of suspicion. The closest acquaintance, with a history of direct contact, psychological motive, and being the last person to meet the victim according to witnesses, all pointed to Ryan. Mendez compiled all the data into a personal relationship analysis and highlighted 4 key factors. 1. An old but unresolved relationship with high tension. 2. Arguments or conflicts related to the baby. 3. Reappearance coinciding with the disappearance. 4. Statements containing many vague points and lacking supporting evidence. Combining these factors, Mendez assessed the possibility of foul play by an acquaintance as concerning, and Ryan Talbot became the person to be placed in the priority suspect group for monitoring. With that conclusion, the official investigation direction shifted focus from the external environment to in-depth analysis of individuals with direct ties to Emily in the final period before she disappeared. After completing the personal relationship analysis and identifying Ryan Talbot as the priority for further scrutiny, Detective Laura Mendez moved to evaluating the feasibility of the timeline Ryan had provided during his interview. This was a critical part to determine whether his statement reflected reality or was merely a constructed timeframe to create the appearance of an alibi. Mendez began by re-establishing the travel route between Carson City and Fallon. She used 2007 traffic maps from a time before later road expansions and confirmed that the drive from Carson City Fire Station to Emily's neighborhood in Fallon typically took about 55 to 65 minutes in a pickup truck, depending on lighting and traffic conditions. According to Ryan's statement, he left Carson at 4:30 p.m. and arrived in Fallon at 5:15, meaning only 45 minutes. Given average speeds on Highway 50 at dusk, this time was significantly shorter than real-world data, the first anomaly. Mendez noted that to cover the distance in 45 minutes with a standard pickup truck, Ryan would have had to drive 10 to 15 miles per hour over the usual speed, which was inconsistent with the road's characteristics of poor lighting and many curves. Mendez then examined the second part of Ryan's statement, leaving Fallon at 5:30 and returning to Carson between 6:20, 6:30. This equated to a 60-mile trip in 50-60 minutes, which seemed more plausible, but still required verification through camera data, because if Ryan truly left Fallon at 5:30, he would have passed at least 2 gas stations and 1 convenience store on Highway 50, locations that typically had surveillance cameras in 2007, even if the quality was low. Mendez contacted each gas station along the route: a Chevron east of Fallon, a Shell on the outskirts of Carson, and a small convenience store near the Carson Highway ramp. The managers all confirmed their cameras were operational at the time, though many files had been deleted or overwritten on a cycle. Mendez requested backups of all remaining data from November 21st, especially from 5 o'clock to 7 p.m. At the Fallon Chevron, the front camera captured several vehicles leaving the area just before 5:30, but none was a silver pickup matching the description. The camera also recorded a few vehicles fueling at 5:42 and 5:58. None matched Ryan's vehicle characteristics. The Carson Shell similarly recorded no vehicles arriving from the Fallon direction between 6 o'clock and 6:30 that matched the shape or color. A few light-colored vehicles appeared, but were SUVs or sedans, not pickups. This was particularly significant if Ryan returned to Carson before 6:30 as stated. The Shell camera was highly likely to have captured his vehicle, as it was the only direct route from Fallon to Carson, unless he took a nearly 20-minute detour via Mound House. An illogical route if he claimed to have gone straight home. Mendez also checked the Carson Corner Mart convenience store camera, where many drivers stopped. It recorded only 2 pickups at 6:27 and 6:34, but both were black and dark green, not silver. No vehicle matching the description appeared in Ryan's stated time frame. Mendez preliminarily concluded that the return trip statement lacked supporting evidence. To bolster her assessment, she cross-referenced weather and road condition reports. November 21st had light winds and rapidly dropping temperatures after 5:15, reducing visibility on mountainous roads. This made the fast travel Ryan described even less feasible. Another inconsistency emerged when Mendez considered the time Ryan spent in Fallon. If he arrived at 5:15 and left at 5:30, the entire meeting lasted only 10-15 minutes, a duration incompatible with needing to resolve an important personal matter, as he mentioned in the interview. Moreover, a neighbor witness reported the vehicle parked in Emily's driveway for about 5-10 minutes before its interior lights went out, making the total presence of the silver pickup in the area roughly match, but not fully align with Ryan's statement. Mendez flagged the neighbor's sighting time as 5:25 to 5:30, raising the question, if Ryan arrived at 5:15 as claimed, the truck should have been parked earlier, so why did the neighbor not see it until 5:25 onward? This discrepancy between the statement and real-world observation continued to be evaluated as abnormal. When compiling all the data, Mendez created a comparison timeline table with 3 columns: Ryan's stated times, witness-provided times, and camera-verifiable times. The results showed that most of Ryan's timestamps lacked supporting evidence and did not align with on-the-ground data. Based on this series of discrepancies, Ryan's timeline was officially marked in the investigation file as inconsistent, requires further verification, and Mendez shifted attention to the possibility that the statement had been adjusted to conceal an unaccounted-for gap between leaving Fallon and arriving in Carson from 5:30 to 6:30, a critical period that could not yet be reasonably explained. After marking Ryan Talbot's timeline as inconsistent and noting that all camera data failed to support the journey he described, Detective Laura Mendez shifted tactics from residential areas to the vast natural surroundings of Fallon, where just a few minutes' drive was enough to leave all populated areas behind. This expanded search phase was deemed critical because if Emily had left the house in a vehicle, as concluded by the K-9 team, then the route leading to Highway 50 and the desert along it was the most likely direction. On the morning of November 23rd, the Churchill County SAR team was mobilized again on a larger scale, A quick briefing was held at Fallon PD to outline the search area along Highway 50 from Stillwater Avenue eastward to Sand Mountain, passing through Carson Sink, a vast dry basin spanning dozens of miles with no inhabitants. Mendez requested more vehicles than the initial day, including ATVs, UTVs, high-clearance SUVs, and a small helicopter from the Churchill Fire Department for aerial observation. SAR divided into 3 main teams, each responsible for a sector. The first team started from the Hartfield residential exit onto Highway 50, sweeping both shoulders, vacant lots, drainage ditches, and areas where a pickup could pull over briefly. They looked for fresh tire tracks, dropped items, clothing, purses, or any signs of movement related to the victim. However, high holiday traffic had caused tire tracks to overlap, making it impossible to identify valuable ones. The second team expanded into Carson Sink, a barren area with characteristic white salt flats. Due to the flat terrain and lack of vegetation, unusual objects were easy to spot from the air. The helicopter circled the area at low altitude, using specialized binoculars to scan for objects with colors standing out against the white background, but after more than 2 hours of flying, nothing suspicious was found beyond old off-road tire marks from recreational drivers the previous week. The ground team continued on foot and with ATVs in a grid pattern, but Carson Sink was too vast and traces too scarce. The third team pushed deeper toward Sand Mountain, a popular site with tall dunes frequented by off-road vehicles. Mendez assessed this as an area that could be exploited to conceal evidence due to constant surface disturbance from recreational activity. SAR mapped detailed points where a pickup could turn off dirt roads to the dunes, narrow paths along brush, and low areas between dune ridges. However, the dunes constantly shifted due to strong winds, making trace detection extremely difficult. Teams scanned the sand surface for personal items, but found nothing related to Emily beyond typical tourist litter. When the teams regrouped at midday, they compared covered areas and created a complete map of all potential vehicle stop points within a 20-mile radius. Despite meticulous marking, no traces matched the disappearance timeline. Meanwhile, the helicopter conducted another lower pass, focusing on concealed areas like deep ravines, cracked earth fissures, or large brush clusters near the road. Despite efforts to examine every area with unusual surface contrast, the crew found no objects of interest. Mendez directed the SAR team to recheck boundary areas between residential zones and desert locations where an offender might stop briefly. The ATV team scanned for unusual tire marks, but most belonged to local or tourist off-road vehicles with no distinctive patterns. By the end of the day, a situation assessment was conducted. The SAR report stated that the entire expanded search area yielded no physical traces related to Emily, no clothing, no personal items, no fabric scraps, no drag marks, and no suspiciously disturbed soil. Mendez recorded this result cautiously. The absence of traces in the vast area did not mean Emily had never been there. Fallon and Carson Sink terrain could erase evidence within hours due to constant strong winds. However, procedurally, with searches near the home, main routes and adjacent desert yielding no specific data, the only conclusion that could be temporarily entered into the file was victim's location undetermined in expanded area. No traces supporting Ryan Talbot's timeline recovered. With these empty results, the investigation entered a phase requiring comprehensive reevaluation of factors related to movement behavior and potential concealment of traces by the vehicle present at Emily's home on the night she disappeared. When the SAR teams returned from the desert with reports yielding no traces to support the investigation direction, Fallon PD faced another type of challenge: false tips from the public, particularly calls from Reno claiming sightings of Emily. The first tip came from a woman living in Reno, about 70 miles from Fallon, who said she had seen a pregnant woman identical to Emily at a grocery store near downtown on the evening of November 22nd. One day after the disappearance, she described the woman accompanied by a tall man and seemingly in a minor argument. The The tip quickly spread in the Fallon community, giving Emily's family temporary hope that she might still be moving around somewhere, even though this contradicted the scene evidence entirely. Detective Mendez had to process the tip according to procedure, despite recognizing it was likely a misidentification. She contacted Reno PD to check the store's cameras at the reported location, since in 2007 store surveillance systems were not always continuously operational. Recovered footage was limited. Nonetheless, Reno PD retrieved partial video from the described time. Mendez reviewed the entire recording and found the woman in the video had no matching features with Emily beyond being pregnant. Different build, shorter hair, faster gait, and no signs of abdominal discomfort, as Emily typically showed near term. Moreover, the appearance time in the video did not match the tipster's account, indicating possible inaccurate memory. Mendez immediately marked it as a false tip. Soon after, Fallon PD received 2 more tips that same day. One claimed to have seen Emily walking along the highway near Fernley, and a truck driver reported encountering a pregnant woman hitchhiking near the Lyon County border. When SAR and local police checked those areas, no evidence confirmed Emily's presence. Such tips commonly arise in widely publicized missing persons cases, especially when the victim's photo is released in newspapers or local social media. In Emily's case, this happened quickly because Fallon is a small community and information spread overnight. Mendez had to handle each tip despite knowing most would be inaccurate. Procedurally, every tip must be checked, because just one valid case could change the entire investigation. The problem was that false tips consumed significant time and manpower, especially when the SER team was already exhausted after hours in the desert. The spread of the Reno tip also created another issue. Some residents began speculating that Emily might have left voluntarily with someone, generating theories completely opposite to the scene evidence Mendez had established. Emily's family faced uncomfortable questions from acquaintances, increasing their stress. When compiling tips from November 22 and 23, Mendez noted that most shared common traits based on guesswork, inaccurate recall, or confusion with other pregnant women in the Reno, Fernley, Fallon area. In the early investigation stage, this type of information created serious interference by forcing the team to expand searches in baseless directions, diluting time and resources that should have been focused on more viable leads, particularly the silver pickup's travel route and Ryan Talbot's unverified statement. When the compiled report was submitted, Mendez clearly stated that none of the 3 received calls held evidentiary value or matched any verified case details. She emphasized in the file that the influx of false tips had begun impacting investigation progress, diverting forces from critical tasks. This reinforced her view that the focus needed to return to evidence-based data rather than chasing scattered community information. After processing a series of false tips and failing to obtain any viable leads from either the residential area or the vast desert region, Detective Laura Mendez was forced to return to an overall analysis of all the data collected during the first 3 days of the investigation to assess the actual level of progress. She compiled each element again. The scene inside the house showed no signs of a struggle, no physical evidence suggesting violent behavior. Searches in both nearby and expanded areas uncovered no traces. Cameras along the Fallon, Carson route recorded no vehicles matching Ryan's statement. All community tips were eliminated, and most importantly, there was no physical evidence whatsoever proving that Emily had been harmed. Meanwhile, although Ryan's timeline was inconsistent, this inconsistency only held suspicious value and was not sufficient to conclude criminal behavior. At that point, the police had no body, no signs of violence, no physical evidence directly linking Ryan to any harmful action, and no evidence indicating that Emily had left the house under duress. According to the 2007 Nevada state standards, to upgrade a missing person case to potential homicide, the investigating force had to have at least one of 4 factors: a body or signs of death, clear traces of violence, physical evidence pointing to criminal activity, or statements confirming the existence of conflict leading to life-threatening danger. The Emily case had none of those factors. Mendez submitted a report to the Fallon PD commander, noting that although the file contained many anomalies, the investigation could not continue at a high level without evidence indicating this was a criminal case. A quick internal meeting was held to evaluate the possibility of retaining the SAR team or continuing to expand the search scope, but reports on conditions in the Carson Sink Desert and Sand Mountain indicated that continuing the search without new leads would consume significant resources without yielding results. Veteran officers also pointed out that in many adult missing person cases in Nevada, especially those without traces, suspending the investigation was a necessary step to avoid diverting resources and to wait for more specific leads. Therefore, the Fallon PD commander decided to suspend search operations and scale back the investigation to a minimum level, maintaining the file in missing persons suspicious status rather than closing it completely, but without deploying additional personnel until new data emerged. Mendez clearly noted in the concluding report, there is no legal basis to elevate the file to criminal investigation level. There is currently insufficient basis to determine foul play. The file was stored along with all collected evidence in the Fallon PD evidence locker. Emily's family was informed that the large-scale search would be suspended and the case would shift to a passive monitoring phase, awaiting new information from the community or relevant emerging data. This was a heavy but procedurally appropriate step. From that point onward, the disappearance of Emily Hartfield officially entered a state of stagnation, as everything possible within professional scope had been done, but led to no indications of her location or fate. The Fallon PD's decision to suspend active investigation left Emily's family in a state of unacceptable denial, especially since they believed the anomalies surrounding her disappearance could not simply be classified as missing without clear cause. Immediately after receiving the notification, Sarah and Mr. Daniel began organizing a small independent search group, including a few of Emily's close friends, 2 of her EMT colleagues, and several community volunteers from Fallon who had known Emily previously. Despite lacking official police support, the group adhered to basic safety principles and planned searches by area on their own. Maps of the Nevada desert were spread out on the Hartfield kitchen table, marking areas already checked by Sarah and circling locations they believed professional teams had not thoroughly searched, such as narrow dirt roads, deep ravines inaccessible to large vehicles, and peripheral areas of Carson Sink bordering the state. They spent the final days of November and early December driving into remote areas, walking for hours through cracked terrain, low brush and desolate flats, hoping to find anything that might belong to Emily, even just a scrap of fabric or a personal item. But the Fallon desert environment was harsher than they imagined. Constant strong winds altered the sand surface, nighttime temperatures dropped low, and the terrain was so vast that reaching a single area alone took hours. Day after day, the group returned empty-handed, exhausted and discouraged, but no one wanted to stop. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to harbor deep suspicion toward Ryan Talbot, the last person to see Emily according to witness data. Since the police were no longer actively monitoring during this phase, she decided to track Ryan's behavior herself to note anything unusual, a risky action but not uncommon in prolonged missing person cases. Sarah and one of Emily's close friends took turns driving to Carson City, parking at a distance sufficient to observe Ryan's apartment without drawing attention. They recorded the times he left home, the times he got off shift at Carson Fire Station, and his regular routes when returning. Over many days of surveillance, they noticed Ryan had a habit of returning on time and showed no signs of anxiety or disruption, a psychological state that made Emily's family even more suspicious. Sarah noted that someone who was the last to see the victim before her disappearance, yet displayed calmness bordering on indifference, was something impossible to overlook. They also observed that Ryan completely avoided Fallon. None of his trips headed toward the town, even though he had frequently visited Fallon previously while training as an EMT. These details were not enough to prove anything, but in the family's eyes, they painted a more suspicious picture than before. Concurrently with monitoring Ryan, the search group continued scanning remote Nevada areas. They moved to locations likely overlooked, such as old dirt roads leading towards Stillwater National Wildlife Refuge, off-road-only sections near Sand Springs, and areas bordering the railroad tracks connecting Fallon, Hazen. Each search day followed the same script, leaving home early, moving in small groups of 3 or 4, sweeping areas in a grid pattern, marking covered spots, and returning as the desert light faded. In a state of uncertainty, the search group persistently operated despite having no real leads, because they believed that if the police could not continue, they could not give up. However, independent searching also brought dangers. Several times the group got disoriented in Carson Sink, where the white expanse of salt flats made positioning difficult. Another time they had to call friends to pull their vehicle out of sinking sand near Sand Mountain. Nonetheless, Sarah refused to stop, believing that missing even one day of searching could overlook a critical trace. Ultimately, after many weeks of effort, the independent search group found no evidence related to Emily, no signs of vehicles stopping in remote locations, and no human traces in the areas they considered most viable. Although it yielded no specific results, this prolonged search activity was carefully documented by Sarah and submitted to Fallon PD as supplemental material. To the family, it served as proof that they had done everything possible while the official file was on hold. Entering 2008, as time passed without any trace of Emily being found, public attention to the disappearance began to decline markedly. In the initial weeks after Emily went missing, news about her appeared continuously in local newspapers, on Fallon radio stations, and in community meetings. However, without new developments or significant discoveries, the reports became sparse and then vanished entirely from the pages. Fallon was a small town, and fresh news always captured attention. A house fire in the suburbs, a highway accident during winter, or a school event would shift media focus. An increasingly thick silence enveloped the Emily case. In the official file, the case remained classified as suspicious missing, meaning there were unusual factors but insufficient basis to upgrade to a criminal investigation. Fallon PD maintained a waiting for leads status, recording any new community tips, but the number of tips dropped rapidly. Emily's family continued search efforts in the early months of the year, but with no changes, the number of volunteers gradually decreased. Some community members, who had enthusiastically participated, had to return to their personal lives, jobs, and families. Meetings to discuss new search directions among Emily's close friends became rare, and although Sarah tried to maintain morale, she could not deny that external support was weakening. Mendez occasionally reviewed the file, but without additional data or evidence, reactivating an active investigation became infeasible. She noted some long-term monitoring points, such as tracking signals from bank cards, medical records, and any updates from pregnancy facilities statewide, but none produced any signals. A pregnant woman near-term disappearing without financial, travel, or communication traces was something that troubled Mendez, but in 2008, no tools existed to expand the investigation beyond the current framework. During this period, Emily's family still tried to keep her name visible in community prayer sessions and Fallon bulletin boards, but over time, the lack of updates led many in the town to believe the case might never have an answer. Those who had witnessed the silver pickup truck or seen the man standing on Emily's porch gradually forgot details or no longer recalled exact timings, making timeline reconstruction harder. In 2009, as Fallon faced economic issues affecting local families, Emily's disappearance was pushed down the community's priority list. The case file remained in Fallon PD storage, occasionally open for record management updates to status, but no new pages were added. The Records Department marked the case as unsolved, without classification changes. Sarah and Mr. Daniel continued the habit of sending brief reports every few months to Fallon PD about anything they thought relevant, though most were minor notes or vague hunches. However, the lack of concrete evidence meant these reports were simply filed without creating new investigative directions. A sense of helplessness spread in the family as they realized the current legal and investigative system had no way to advance without a major breakthrough. Many in the town gradually believed the disappearance had reached a dead end, and with no updates for a long time, they stopped discussing it, viewing it as one of those sad tragedies without a clear resolution. Mendez, though no longer actively handling the case daily, kept Emily's situation in mind, placing the file in the periodic review group despite knowing that throughout 2008, 2009, no signals suggested the case was nearing a solution. Toward the end of 2009, as Emily Hartfield's disappearance gradually faded from community attention, Fallon PD unexpectedly received some new information related to Ryan Talbot, the person initially evaluated as the most important witness in the early days of the investigation, but who could not be considered a suspect due to lack of direct evidence. This information primarily came from Ryan's old acquaintances after they heard the family continuing to call on the community for any possibly related details. One of those contacting Sarah was Ryan's ex-girlfriend, who had dated him about a year before Emily's disappearance. Meeting Sarah at a coffee shop in Fernley, she described Ryan as having a strongly controlling personality in personal relationships, often wanting to know where she was, who she was in contact with, and getting angry when she interacted with male friends. She said Ryan was not the type to easily accept a breakup or let go of a relationship if he felt betrayed or lost control, a trait that particularly caught Sarah's attention because Emily had described feeling uncomfortable with recent calls from the man believed to be Ryan. However, when Sarah passed this information to Fallon PD, Detective Mendez assessed it as merely a personality description and personal experience, not direct evidence of any criminal act. In legal records, a controlling personality could not be used as basis to upgrade or reopen the investigation without specific conduct related to the victim. Around the same time, a former colleague of Ryan's from the Carson City Fire Department proactively contacted Fallon PD after reviewing an old news segment about Emily. He said that on the evening of November 21, 2007, the night Emily disappeared, Ryan displayed unusual tension when arriving at the station the next day. According to the colleague, Ryan was usually calm in all situations, but that day he appeared distracted, minimally communicative, and frequently checked his phone despite not being on shift. When asked why he was at the station after taking the previous day off, Ryan only replied briefly that it was personal business and left earlier than usual. This aligned with information that Ryan had taken sudden leave on the day Emily disappeared, but the colleague's account remained behavioral observation, insufficient as evidence to establish a direct link between Ryan and Emily's disappearance. Mendez recorded this statement in the file, viewing it as supplemental data to assess consistency in Ryan's behavior before and after the victim's disappearance. However, under 2009 investigative standards, unusual tension or behavior alone was not enough to obtain warrants for searches, surveillance, or reopening the file in a criminal direction. Law enforcement agencies required physical evidence or clear basis showing the victim in danger to upgrade from suspicious missing to potential homicide, and this information did not meet that threshold. When compiling the two new sources, Mendez prepared an internal report stating that, although the supplemental data helped further outline Ryan's personality and behavior around the disappearance, it completely lacked legal value to create new probable cause. There was no admission, no traces of violence, no scene evidence implicating him, and no legal factor exceeding suspicion. Ryan appearing tense or having controlling behavior in prior relationships was merely supportive of inference, not empirical evidence. Fallon PD, therefore, could not shift the case to any upgraded investigative status. Internally, many officers also felt that continuing based on such vague information would draw the investigation into emotionally driven hypotheses rather than evidence. Mendez clearly noted in the evaluation that the case still severely lacked core elements, such as the victim's location, off-home scene evidence, or indications of criminal conduct. Thus, although the Ryan-related information reinforced the family's and Mendez's own intuition that Emily's disappearance was not random, it lacked sufficient weight to change the case status. Throughout 2008-2009, Emily Hartfield's file, therefore, retained the suspicious missing classification, remaining in the category of non-progressing cases, but not yet qualifying for criminal investigation listing, creating a significant silence in the family's pursuit of truth, and keeping the case in prolonged stagnation. Entering 2010, as Emily Hartfield's disappearance had gone more than 2 years without progress or any legal leads sufficient to reactivate an active investigation, Fallon PD was compelled to shift file handling in accordance with Nevada state procedures for long-term missing person cases. At that point, maintaining the file at the local level was no longer appropriate because Fallon PD lacked long-term storage capacity and specialized personnel to monitor backlog cases. On that basis, Fallon PD initiated procedures to transfer the entire file to the cold case unit of the Reno Police Department, where resources were better, storage more professional, and access to state and federal databases available. The transfer process began by assembling all evidence seized during the initial investigation phase, fingerprint samples collected in Emily's home, her remaining purse and personal items, copies of messages and emails provided by the family, complete scene reports, photos of the house layout, maps of the Fallon-Carson route, interview transcripts with Ryan Talbot, and compiled SIP search results reports for both nearby and expanded desert areas. All evidence was placed in specialized storage containers, recoded according to Reno Cold Case Unit standards. At that time, Reno's file processing system was being upgraded to new standards, integrating document digitization and uniform identification coding, so Emily's file was included in the group requiring conversion to electronic format. A team of records technicians began scanning all paper documents, entering each item into the evidence management system, and tagging physical evidence with barcodes for future retrieval ease. This digitization took several weeks because one cold case unit requirement was ensuring all data was accurately preserved in chronological order, along with original investigator notes, so any future handler could understand prior investigative logic. During reclassification, Reno Cold Case Unit also applied new classification standards issued in late 2010 to unify evaluation processes for long-term missing cases. Under these standards, cases were redivided into 3 groups: non-criminal missing, suspicious missing, and likely criminal act. Insufficient evidence. Emily's file initially fell under suspicious missing, but Reno conducted a full data review to determine if the classification should remain or be adjusted. Upon reviewing scene reports, SAR reports, witness statements, and the relationship between Emily and Ryan, Reno made a preliminary assessment that the case contained many unusual factors, specifically the victim's pregnancy, personal items fully remaining in the home, disappearance, timing coinciding with the appearance of an acquaintance with conflict history, and inconsistent timeline from the last person to see the victim. However, due to no body, no traces of violence, no forensic evidence, and no technical data such as phone pings or clear cameras, Reno concluded the file was not yet sufficient for transfer to likely criminal act. Insufficient evidence. Therefore, the original classification was retained. Suspicious missing, but Emily's file was marked as a priority review case, meaning it was in the group requiring periodic review every 2 years or upon new technology relevant to evidence analysis, though such capabilities were limited at the time. During reclassification, Reno also held a meeting among veteran investigators to assess the feasibility of reconducting basic steps, but the consensus was no viable new investigative direction. The case was placed in cold case storage with a status awaiting activation upon new data. From 2011 to 2012, Emily's file remained dormant in the cold case system, only opened during Reno's periodic review cycles or when the family submitted additional reports with minor notes about Ryan or anything they found unusual in subsequent years. However, since these notes lacked new physical evidence or legally weighty data, the file was updated but unchanged in status. By officially transferring the case to Reno's cold case system, the investigative journey into Emily Hartfield's disappearance entered a prolonged stagnation phase where the file was carefully preserved, but no new factors emerged sufficient to lift it from the silence of unsolved cases. Entering the 2011-2012 period, when the Emily Hartfield case file had been stably archived in the Reno PD's cold case storage, the forensic science landscape in the United States began to undergo a powerful transformation with the emergence of new technologies capable of creating breakthroughs in unsolved cases. A series of modern forensic methods were developed or significantly improved, a process that veteran investigators described as a quiet revolution in criminal justice. Among the most prominent technologies of that time, touch DNA was regarded as the biggest leap forward. Unlike before, when DNA sampling required visible traces such as blood, hair, semen, or body tissue, touch DNA allowed laboratories to extract and analyze DNA from extremely small amounts of epithelial cells left behind when a person touched an object's surface. This technology opened up the possibility of processing evidence that forensic science in 2007 could not utilize, for example, door handles, seat surfaces, purse edges, jacket zippers, or any object that the victim or suspect had touched. When the Reno Cold Case Unit was introduced to touch DNA through state-level professional workshops, many investigators began considering its potential application to long-dormant cases. However, at the time this technology started becoming widespread, the Emily file had not yet been prioritized because the case lacked evidence at the scene outside the home, and the evidence collected inside only included Emily's personal items and a few unidentified faint fingerprints, which were deemed too low value for advanced testing. Alongside touch DNA, forensic soil analysis also emerged as a new technique with great potential. Laboratories began using methods to analyze microscopic minerals, organic composition, and soil structure to determine whether shoes, tires, or objects had come into contact with a specific geographic area. In Nevada, where desert regions had distinct characteristics, Carson Sink Salt Flats, Sand Mountain Fine Sand, Fallon Farmlands Red Soil, forensic soil was seen as a particularly useful tool. If applied in 2007, it could have helped determine whether the pickup truck seen at Emily's home had ever entered the Carson Sink area, or whether a suspect's shoes had soil from a particular location at the time of her disappearance. However, when the Emily file was moved to cold case status, no soil samples had been collected from her home or from Ryan's vehicle. Therefore, forensic soil, despite its promise, could not be directly applied to the case. Another technology that began appearing during this period was GPS recovery, the ability to retrieve historical data from older GPS devices, including vehicle-mounted GPS units, handheld navigation devices, or internal tracking systems in industrial vehicles. Starting around 2012, some commercial forensic companies began offering services for extracting deleted or overwritten GPS data, allowing investigators to review vehicle routes, stop times, and stored paths in memory. For cases involving travel, especially across vast desert areas like Nevada, this technology could create a major breakthrough. However, at the time of Emily's disappearance, most civilian vehicles in Nevada did not have fixed GPS systems. In particular, Ryan Talbot's 2001 common model pickup truck was not equipped with any default navigation device. Even if police had authority to seize the vehicle for examination, there would have been no GPS data to recover. Nevertheless, the Reno Cold Case Unit still noted this technology on their list of potential tools for future application to cases involving vehicles. When compiling the emerging modern forensic technologies, Reno conducted reassessments of some old cold case files to see if any were suitable for new testing. The Emily Hartfield file was also included in the preliminary review list. Reno's evaluation report clearly stated that the case had many unusual details but lacked basic evidence for applying next-generation forensic methods. Touch DNA required surfaces the suspect might have touched. Forensic soil needed samples from the suspect vehicle or footwear. GPS recovery needed device data that did not exist in this case. However, the Reno Cold Case Unit still added an important note to the Emily file. If new evidence is discovered in the future, especially related to the suspect vehicle or personal items outside the home, immediately consider applying next-generation forensic technology. This was one of the rare times the Emily file was flagged as having potential for reopening if circumstances changed. At the end of 2012, the final file update for this period was entered into the system. Forensic technology is advancing rapidly. The file currently does not qualify for new testing, but if new samples appear, analysis capabilities could far exceed those of 2007. Although the overall conclusion was that new technology could not be applied to the Emily case at that time, the 2010-2012 period still marked an important shift for the first time since the case hit a dead end. Advancements in forensic science opened the possibility that one day technology might overcome the limitations that had prevented the original investigation from progressing further. While the Reno Cold Case Unit continued to update new forensic technologies in their system, but could not apply them to the Emily case due to lack of evidence, a completely unexpected development occurred in early 2013, opening the possibility of changing the entire investigative landscape. The Carson City Fire Department, where Ryan Talbot had worked, conducted a clearance of old equipment after completing upgrades to their fleet and internal navigation systems. Most older fire vehicles were equipped with box-type GPS tracking devices mounted under the dashboard, primarily used to monitor routes during emergency responses. Although this technology was primitive compared to 2013 standards and many devices suffered from data overwrite issues, Carson Fire Department proceeded to remove all units for parts recovery and metal scrapping. During this dismantling process, a veteran technician named Brandon McCaffrey discovered a 2007 GPS box belonging to a fire vehicle assigned to the Carson East area, the exact team Ryan had worked on at the time of Emily's disappearance. This GPS box was not marked as defective, nor was it on the list of usable devices. It was simply removed and placed with other units of unclear status. When McCaffrey did a quick check, the device powered on but displayed a data loading error. He noticed it had a compact flash memory card slot, the type many early GPS units used to store routes for months before overwriting. Out of professional curiosity, McCaffrey removed the memory card and checked it with an old reader in the tech room. The computer could not immediately recognize it, leading him to think the data was corrupted or reformatted. However, instead of discarding the card into the trash like many technicians would do with faulty equipment, he kept both the GPS box and card in a cardboard box that was mistakenly placed in the pending classification storage area. McCaffrey had a habit of holding on to old parts just in case they might be useful later, so the 2007 GPS box remained in storage rather than being destroyed. When Carson Fire Department completed the clearance, all defective or marked for disposal equipment was collected for processing, but the storage box where McCaffrey had temporarily placed the GPS was not on the recall list. It was pushed further back into the rear equipment storage area behind the garage, where old parts from many years were kept, largely unnoticed. For months afterward, no one opened the box or checked its contents. To the fire department, old GPS units had no practical value, and no one remembered that the box contained a device once installed on a vehicle in service during the time Emily Hartfield disappeared. Its existence was purely coincidental, a potential piece of evidence forgotten in the shadows of storage, never entered into the investigation file, and unknown to anyone that it might hold log data from the period Mendez had tried, but failed to access due to 2007's technological limitations. Even more notably, this GPS box was not in Carson Fire Department's official inventory because 2007 records noted the device had malfunctioned and been replaced, so it was not tracked in the asset management system. It existed as a random exception during the upgrade, not marked, not destroyed, and not discovered. Even when the Reno Cold Case Unit reviewed technological possibilities in the Emily file, No one knew that a device from Ryan's fleet still existed. What was known about fire vehicle GPS at the time of Emily's disappearance always ended with the conclusion, no data available for retrieval or recovery. But this forgotten GPS box, with its compact flash card never overwritten since 2007, lay dormant, waiting for someone to open it at the right time. And as late as 2013, no investigator knew that the device still existed in Carson Fire Department storage, carrying the potential to completely alter the understanding of Ryan Talbot's movements on the night Emily disappeared. Though until then, it remained just a dusty old unit untouched by anyone. Starting in 2014, Nevada began implementing a statewide program to review long-term missing persons cases. An initiative driven by a series of cases lasting over a decade without progress, many of which were later proven to involve criminal elements from the start, but overlooked due to limited investigative tools or outdated standards. The program was managed by the Nevada Attorney General's Office in coordination with Reno PD, Las Vegas Metro, and county sheriff offices. This was the first time the state formed a dedicated team to reassess all missing persons cases over 5 years old, reprioritize them, and reclassify according to updated legal standards. The Emily Hartfield file, which had been in Reno's cold case storage since 2010, was among the 124 cases reviewed in the first wave. Although the name Emily Hartfield initially drew no special attention, due to the lack of a body, signs of violence, or physical evidence, the review team quickly recognized numerous asymmetries in the case. The victim was in her final month of pregnancy, all personal items were left in the home, a man with a sensitive connection to the victim appeared just before her disappearance, and that person's timeline did not match reality. In internal review meetings, some veteran Reno investigators noted that Fallon PD's handling in 2007 was appropriate for the era, but the main risk was that technology and professional standards at the time were too limited for deeper evaluation. For example, the absence of signs of struggle in the home had led Fallon PD to lean toward voluntary departure, but under 2014 legal standards, many criminal missing persons cases left no disturbance traces. One investigator particularly highlighted a detail Mendez had clearly noted in the initial report: tracking dogs lost the scent at the road's edge, indicating the victim almost certainly entered a vehicle. This completely contradicted the prior insufficient foul play assessment, as a woman near full-term pregnancy would never leave home without her phone, jacket, wallet, and hospital bag. A basic investigative logic in the new era. The analysis framework applied to each case included 18 criteria to determine the likelihood of criminal victimization. When applied to Emily's case, the file met 11 of the 18 foul play-related criteria, far exceeding the threshold of 6 for potential homicide designation. Notable criteria included disappearance under unusual circumstances, late-term pregnancy, strained relationship with a specific individual, no signs of preparation to leave, no use of bank cards or phone afterward. The last person to see the victim had an unverified timeline and potential motive. No traces suggesting voluntary departure. In the final evaluation meeting in late August 2014, the review team agreed that Emily's case had a high risk of criminal involvement. However, without a body or definitive forensic evidence, it could not be upgraded to homicide investigation, but was reclassified from suspicious missing to potential homicide. Insufficient evidence. This was a new state classification for missing persons cases with strong criminal indicators, but lacking legal foundation for search warrants or large-scale investigations. For the Emily file, inclusion in this category meant annual periodic reviews instead of the standard 3 to 5 years for regular cold cases. It also prioritized access to new forensic technologies if applicable. From 2015 to 2016, the Emily Hartfield file was reopened twice for review. Each time, the dedicated team noted that although no new evidence existed, the case had high solvability potential if a breakthrough emerged. Whether from technology, delayed witness statements, or additional evidence discovery. The 2015 and 2016 update notes emphasized that the case's key lay in the vehicle present at Emily's home at the time of disappearance, and the movements of the last person to see her. One Reno investigator added a short but significant line to the file. If any data on Ryan Talbot's vehicle from November 21, 2007 exists, this case could change completely. No one knew that in Carson City, a 2007 GPS device from the fleet Ryan had used lay forgotten in a box, unopened, and that it still held intact data from the time Emily disappeared. Entering 2017, the disappearance of Emily Hartfield marked a full 10 years without resolution, but in what seemed like complete deadlock, a delayed memory from a local fisherman unexpectedly became the first bright spot leading to a specific geographic location, something a decade of investigation had never achieved. The man, named Mark Ellison, a Fernley resident, contacted the Reno Cold Case Unit after watching a television program about long-term missing persons cases in Nevada. During the program, he recognized the name Emily Hartfield, and the illustration of a silver pickup truck in the overview segment triggered a memory he had never previously thought relevant. When meeting with Reno PD, Mark recounted that on the evening of November 21, 2007, the day Emily disappeared, he was at the north shore of Lahontan Reservoir night fishing, a habit he had maintained for years. It was around nearly 7 p.m., dark early due to winter, the reservoir area quiet with only a few scattered fishermen. What stuck with Mark was not anything unusual, but the appearance of a silver pickup truck driving into a dirt slope area down to the water's edge, a spot rarely visited at night. This was out of the ordinary because most fishermen or campers used the higher parking areas with easier and safer access. Mark particularly noticed the truck turned on its lights for about a minute, then turned them off completely, not leaving immediately, but staying longer in the dark. He did not see anyone exit the vehicle or hear doors opening, but clearly remembered the engine idling down as if parked and running briefly before shutting off. Afterward, the truck remained stationary for a few minutes, then left toward the dirt road leading to Lahontan West Dam, not the main direction back to Fallon or Fernley. Mark had thought it was just someone admiring the lake at night or checking a camping spot, so he told no one. It was not until 2017, when he saw the description of a truck matching the one last seen at Emily's home, that the memory became significant. The Reno Cold Case Unit immediately recorded the statement, as this was the first time the case had a specific geographic location tied to the suspect vehicle. For 10 years, all speculation had been limited to the Fallon Highway 50, Carson Sink area, with no markers to cross-reference the route of the last person to see Emily. Mark's description of the truck at Lahontan Reservoir, about 25 minutes drive from Fallon, created a time and location intersection that prior investigations had never questioned. Even more notably, Mark's description matched the neighbor witness for Emily, silver color common pickup model, one headlight slightly dim, and engine sound consistent with early 2000s vehicles. He even pointed out a specific spot on the reservoir map where the ground formed a gentle natural slope to the water, an area hidden from the main road. Reno PD sent 2 investigators to meet Mark multiple times to ensure his memory had not distorted over time. Each time, Mark described the truck with high consistency, even recalling a small detail. The license plate had no decorative frame, which was common for fire department or public service vehicles that kept them standard. Reno also confirmed that the time Mark saw the truck around 7 p.m. fell within the unverified gap in Ryan's 2007 stated timeline. Ryan's statement had no supporting evidence, and cameras along the route to Carson recorded no matching pickup in that time frame. Mark's account opened the possibility that instead of heading straight to Carson as claimed, the silver pickup had gone to Lahontan Reservoir immediately after leaving Fallon. The Reno Cold Case Unit immediately marked the Lahontan Reservoir area as the first geographic marker in the Emily Hartfield case, a major step forward because for 10 years, the investigation had no specific locations beyond the victim's home. Although there was no new physical evidence, and it could not be confirmed that the truck Mark saw was definitively Ryan's, the matching vehicle description, feasible route, and empty time frame made it the first truly valuable investigative lead since 2007. Reno PD updated the file, noting that the Lahontan Reservoir area should be considered if a search reopening opportunity arose, especially the dirt slopes near the water, where a vehicle could stop for just minutes without leaving long-term traces. This was the first time in many years that the Emily Hartfield case had an investigative direction based on location rather than mere hypothesis. In 2018, as the Reno Cold Case Unit continued reviewing long unsolved missing persons files, the investigator assigned to the Emily Hartfield case decided to re-examine all documents related to Ryan Talbot, especially after new witness testimony from Mark Ellison opened up the possibility that the journey of the silver pickup truck had not occurred as Ryan had described. One of the items placed on the re-examination list was Ryan's shift schedule at the Carson City Fire Department during the week. Emily disappeared. A detail that seemed to have been cross-checked by Fallon PD back in 2007, but had never been thoroughly analyzed using modern investigative standards. Requesting old shift records for a firefighter from 11 years earlier was not easy, as many documents had been archived or converted to different formats, but the Carson Fire Department had implemented a digital storage system at the time, so many shift logs from 2006, 2008 still existed in the internal database. When Reno PD submitted a formal request, the administrative department of the Carson Fire Department provided Ryan's complete work schedule from October through December 2007, including details of duty days, days off, shift start and end times, and notes about leave requests. During the analysis of these documents, the investigator noticed something suspicious. Ryan's shift record for November 21, 2007, did not match what he had stated in his interview with Fallon PD 10 years earlier. In his initial statement, Ryan said he was not on duty on November 21 and stayed home all day before driving to Fallon around 4:30 p.m. However, the 2007 shift log showed Ryan listed for a 24-hour shift starting at 7 a.m. on November 21 and running until 7 a.m. the next day. Even more notably, in the notes column for that day, there was an entry, leave requested. Personal emergency, approved at 4:12 p.m. This was a time that strangely coincided with when Ryan said he left Carson for Fallon, meaning the leave request occurred just minutes before he departed, according to his statement. Furthermore, the administrative notes indicated that Ryan had not requested the day off in advance, but had asked for leave during his shift, an uncommon practice in the highly regulated firefighting environment where readiness is strictly enforced. Upon digging deeper, Reno uncovered an even more serious detail. Ryan had claimed that taking the day off was planned in advance, but internal records showed he had been present at the station at 7 a.m. and left at 4:15 p.m. A time frame so precise it could not be dismissed as mere coincidence. This completely contradicted Ryan's description of himself as free all day. Reno continued to check for any discrepancies due to data entry errors or later updates, but when cross-referencing the records stored in the old server system, the information remained consistent, confirming that the 2007 entry was accurate. A former colleague of Ryan's also confirmed that on that afternoon, Ryan left the station in a hurry, saying only a brief personal matter before departing. This colleague's statement had been recorded by Fallon PD in 2009, but at the time, without the shift records for comparison, it had not been properly evaluated. When piecing together all the data, the Reno Cold Case Unit realized that Ryan's actual timeline differed almost entirely from his initial statement. He had not stayed home all day, nor had he taken the day off in advance, but had remained at the fire station until 4:15 p.m. This created an entirely new sequence of events. Ryan requested leave at the last minute in the late afternoon, left the station hurriedly, and then appeared in Fallon, just about an hour later. Consistent with the witness who saw the silver pickup truck in front of Emily's house around 5:25 p.m. Reno also noted that Ryan's sudden leave request without a specific reason and departing the station near dusk was unusual in the firefighting profession, as personnel typically only request mid-shift leave for genuine family emergencies. In the analysis submitted to the Nevada Attorney General's office at the end of 2019, Reno clearly stated that Ryan's statement was not only inconsistent but systematically contradicted by the fire department shift records, and identified this as the first critical factor in 12 years, sufficient to elevate the case to a higher criminal risk level. Although this data was not enough to establish probable cause under legal standards, it once again placed Ryan at the center of suspicion, shattering the plausibility of his initial statement and completely altering the investigators' view of the events on the night Emily disappeared. In early 2020, as Nevada's cold case review program entered its expansion phase, the Emily Hartfield file was transferred to Detective Aaron Kincaid of the Reno Cold Case Unit, a detective renowned for his ability to reconstruct cases minute by minute and uncover discrepancies in seemingly dead-end investigation. Upon receiving the file, Kincaid decided not to rely on any prior conclusions, but to rebuild the entire case from the ground up, treating all information in the file as raw data requiring reanalysis. His first task was to create a detailed timeline starting from the morning of November 21, 2007, up to the point when Emily was confirmed missing. Kincaid spread out all the scene reports, witness statements, SAR data, family statements, Ryan's shift records, information from the 2014-2016 review, and the new statement from Mark Ellison across a large pinboard in the cold case office. He divided November 21, 2007, into 15-minute intervals, then narrowed it further to 5-minute markers, and finally to individual minutes within the critical window from 4 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. The period identified as the core event window. Based on family statements, Emily arrived home at 4:55 p.m. The unopened grocery bags indicated she did nothing afterward. Her phone remained plugged in with no outgoing or incoming calls after 4:50. A neighbor witness saw the silver pickup truck parked in front of Emily's house between 5:22-5:25 p.m. The vehicle lights were on for a few dozen seconds before turning off. From his R reports and K9 data, the victim left the house afterward via a vehicle. This was the most solidly established portion of the timeline. Kincaid marked the 5:25:30 window as the sole confirmed interaction point between Emily and the unidentified man who appeared on her front porch. When shifting to analyze Ryan's movements, Kincaid created a comparison table with 3 columns: Ryan's statements, objectively obtained data, and timelines that supported or refuted each detail. Ryan claimed he left Carson at 4:30 p.m., arrived in Fallon around 5:15, stayed 10-15 minutes, then immediately left to return to Carson, arriving back around 6:20-6:30. But the shift records from Carson City Fire Department showed he was still at the station until 4:15 p.m., and only requested leave during his shift at that exact time. This was the first contradiction. The earliest Ryan could have left the station was 4:20. Even with continuous driving and no obstacles, reaching Fallon in 55 minutes was feasible, but not much faster. Kincaid obtained 2007 traffic maps, analyzed average speeds on the Carson-Fallon route via Highway 50, factoring in slowdown points at Mound House and Silver Springs. The fastest time a 2001 pickup truck could cover that route was 54-58 minutes. This led to the conclusion Ryan could not have arrived in Fallon before 5:15 p.m. Even under ideal conditions, this time frame perfectly overlapped with the witness sighting of the pickup at Emily's house, but simultaneously demolished Ryan's claim that he arrived in Fallon earlier and was not in a hurry. Next, Kincaid analyzed the departure time from Fallon. If Ryan truly left Emily's house at 5:30 as claimed, the return trip to Carson would take at least 55 minutes. That meant Ryan would arrive back in Carson between 6:25–6:35 p.m. This theoretically matched Ryan's statement, but it did not align with footage from the Shell gas station cameras on the outskirts of Carson, which recorded no silver pickup truck entering Carson between 6 o'clock and 6:45. Camera data in Fallon also showed no pickup truck leaving the area in the timeframe Ryan described. Meanwhile, witness Mark Ellison's statement placed a silver pickup truck near Lahontan Lake around 7 o'clock p.m., a location completely off the route Ryan described. When integrating this data into the timeline, Kincaid saw that Ryan's movements contained a 45–60-minute unaccounted gap that could not be reasonably explained between leaving Fallon and the truck appearing at Lahontan Lake. If Ryan truly returned to Carson between 6:25–6:35, he would have passed the Shell cameras, but the cameras did not capture his vehicle. If he did not return to Carson but detoured to Lahontan Lake, this contradicted his entire initial statement. Kincaid labeled this gap as a time loss of control, a term used when a statement cannot align with any objective data. Continuing the analysis, Kincaid obtained topographic maps of Lahontan State Recreation Area and measured the distance from Emily's house to the location Mark described. The results showed Ryan could easily travel from Fallon to that spot in 25–30 minutes. This perfectly filled the unaccounted gap, making the hypothesis that Ryan detoured to Lahontan Lake far more plausible than his own statement. Upon completing the minute-by-minute comparison timeline from 4 o'clock to 7:30 p.m., Kincaid discovered 8 critical time points where Ryan's statements were either false or impossible based on objective data. This level of discrepancy was severe, far exceeding the bounds of misremembering or inaccurate recall. He prepared an internal report listing all contradictions and concluded that Ryan's statement was more reconstructed than narrative, while recommending a full re-evaluation of the physical evidence seized in 2007 using modern forensic technology. Kincaid's report was nearly 40 pages long and was submitted to the Reno Cold Case Unit commander and the Nevada Attorney General's office, emphasizing the current timeline cannot support any conclusion consistent with the initial statement. The systematic discrepancies indicate the need to re-examine all evidence with modern technology, particularly touch DNA and material analysis. Kincaid requested access to the evidence storage vault at Reno Evidence Storage, visual inspection of each item, re-evaluation of fingerprints and contact traces, and re-scanning of evidence surfaces for suitable testing samples. He also proposed retesting all evidence collected by Fallon PD in 2007 but never submitted due to technological limitations at the time. Kincaid's report concluded with a strong recommendation: the Emily Hartfield file should be treated as a high-probability criminal case. The time and geographic discrepancies require reopening forensic analysis. This was the first time in 13 years that an investigator formally requested a complete re-examination of all evidence, and the first time the case timeline was reconstructed using modern methods sufficiently to undermine the entire foundation of the original statements. In early March 2021, just as Detective Aaron Kincaid had restructured the Emily Hartfield file, and it was awaiting approval for evidence testing, an unexpected development emerged from a source completely outside the official investigation. A local hunter reported finding human bones in the southern area of Lahontan Lake, a location that had never been part of the original Fallon PD or SAR search perimeters. The hunter, Bill Corbett, a resident of Fernley, said he was tracking jackrabbits in the wilderness behind a sloping dirt area leading to the lake, not far from the spot where witness Mark Ellison had described seeing the silver pickup truck on the night Emily disappeared. Corbett was familiar with the terrain and often hunted there in spring, but this year he ventured deeper than usual to avoid crowded hunting groups. While crossing a cracked dirt path covered with low brush, he spotted something that clearly did not belong in the natural landscape: a portion of a long bone protruding from the dry ground, exposed after strong winds in late February. At first, he thought it was animal bone, but upon closer inspection, he quickly recognized the distinctive shape of a human arm bone. something he had learned to identify from years as a rescue volunteer. Corbett immediately left the area and used his phone to report it to the Lyon County Sheriff, the agency responsible for the bordering Lahontan area. Within less than an hour, a patrol team arrived, secured the scene, and contacted the Reno Cold Case Unit because the location matched a long unsolved missing persons case under reevaluation. When the name Emily Hartfield was mentioned over the radio, Reno immediately called Detective Kincaid and requested he go directly to the scene. Kincaid drove to Lahontan that same afternoon. Upon arrival, he noted that the bone discovery site was on a low strip of land about 300 meters from the water's edge, concealed behind two clusters of brush and completely invisible from the main road. This was the type of terrain SAR teams could not have fully covered in the 2007 searches, especially since the deep cracks in this area had only formed after 14 years of lake-level fluctuations. As the Reno forensic team conducted a preliminary survey, they located two additional small bone fragments scattered within a 20-meter radius. What drew the most attention was not the bones themselves, but an item lying between two low bushes, covered by a thin layer of soil, a silver necklace that had tarnished over time. One of the forensic technicians picked it up, gently brushed off the dust, and discovered a teardrop-shaped pendant with engraved patterns that Emily's family had described in great detail in the 2007 file. This was the necklace Emily had worn constantly since high school, considered an inseparable personal item and one that her family insisted she would never remove, unless forced by external intervention. The appearance of the necklace at this location caused the entire forensic team to fall silent for a few seconds. Without deeper examination, they understood that the likelihood this was a site directly connected to Emily was almost certain. Kincaid personally inspected the necklace, comparing the pendant to photos provided by the family in the file. Every line and familiar scratch matched perfectly. He immediately ordered an expanded perimeter, increasing the protected radius to 200 meters and barring all unauthorized access. The forensic team proceeded with standard criminal case excavation protocols, marking every potential evidence point, photographing the entire site from multiple angles, surface scanning for traces, and staking each bone fragment or foreign object. Another bone fragment was found about 10 meters away, appearing to be part of a femur. Signs of weathering and decomposition were consistent with bones exposed in a desert environment for many years. This aligned with the theory that the bones had been exposed by strong winds shifting the sand layer. As the team sifted the topsoil layer, they uncovered another small item, a metal button of the type attached to women's winter jackets from 2006-2007. Although it could not be immediately confirmed as Emily's, the presence of multiple period-appropriate objects in the same area only heightened the site's suspicious nature. Kincaid observed the entire scene, sensing clearly that this could be the first turning point in the 14-year journey. He directed the forensic team to collect all recovered bones, seal them by discovery location, place them in specialized containers, and create a detailed map for potential future scene reconstruction. He also requested soil samples near the bone sites for geological comparison, since if the original death or body placement site could be determined, forensic soil analysis could play a key role. The necklace was secured separately, sealed in an antioxidation preservation bag to prevent further damage to the already fragile metal. Kincaid noted in his report that the necklace discovery at the scene was the first direct link connecting Emily's personal evidence to a specific location outside her home. The critical next step was transferring all bones to the Nevada Forensic Medical Examiner's lab to determine if they belonged to one or multiple individuals, and most importantly, whether sufficient DNA remained for analysis, though this was unlikely given over a decade of outdoor exposure. Nevertheless, the mere discovery of human bones alongside Emily's personal belongings was enough for Reno to officially designate this as a potential criminal scene. Kincaid closed the scene at the end of the day, but he knew full well that from the moment the necklace was picked up, the Emily Hartfield case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It had moved closer than ever to the truth buried for 14 years on the edge of Lahontan Lake. When all the bones and evidence from the Lahontan area were brought back to the Reno Forensic Laboratory, Detective Aaron Kincaid immediately expedited the bone DNA testing procedures, even though he knew full well that the chances of obtaining results from bones exposed outdoors for over 14 years were very low. However, the Reno lab had been equipped with next-generation DNA extraction technology since 2019, allowing genetic material to be isolated from heavily degraded bone samples, particularly through the powder milling method, in which the bone is ground into fine powder and DNA is extracted from the inner core, the area typically least damaged by harsh weather. In the first 2 weeks, the forensic team focused on the femur and humerus bones, as these were among the largest recovered and more likely to retain DNA. They performed mechanical cleaning to remove soil, rock, and contaminants, then moved to UV decontamination to prevent foreign DNA from contaminating the results. When the bone powder samples were loaded into the DNA sequencer, the testing team did not expect much. In cold cases of such long duration, especially in Nevada, where summer temperatures can exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit and winter lows drop below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, DNA typically degrades to tiny, unreadable fragments. But on the 17th day after sampling, the analysis team received the first promising signal. A nuclear DNA sequence, though extremely faint, appeared in the read band, sufficient to begin amplification. Next-generation PCR technology allowed amplification of DNA segments so small that the 2007 lab could not have processed them. By the 21st day, the testing team had reconstructed about 60% of the necessary STR marker profile for comparison. The Reno Cold Case Unit immediately contacted Emily's family to request DNA samples from the parents. A request that was deeply emotional, but they understood this could be the final step in confirming Emily's fate after 14 years of waiting. The DNA comparison between the bone samples and the families was completed on the 27th day. The parent-child match rates for both father and mother exceeded 99.99%, confirming that the bones found at Lake Lahontan belonged to Emily Hartfield. When the scientific report was signed and confirmed, the Reno lab sent the results directly to Kincaid with the note, "Bone DNA conclusively identified as belonging to Emily Hartfield." Kincaid read the report in silence, feeling a heavy emptiness settle in. The case he had pursued for a year, along with the family's persistent efforts over more than a decade, finally had the answer no one wanted. He immediately contacted the Nevada Attorney General's office to notify them that the case status had shifted from potential homicide, insufficient evidence, to confirmed homicide, paving the way for a formal criminal investigation. In his report to superiors, Kincaid stated clearly that identifying Emily's bones not only confirmed the victim's death, but also established that the discovery site was a secondary scene, as the scattering of the bones and evidence locations did not indicate this was the initial death site. This meant the victim had been moved post-mortem, an action directly constituting evidence of crime concealment. The report also emphasized the role of the necklace found. The personal item linked to the victim and discovered near the bones was strong evidence of human intervention, rather than a natural accident. Kincaid took the time to call Emily's family to inform them of the results before the official announcement. The call took place in a choked atmosphere when Sarah, who had spent her youth searching for her sister, could only ask one short question: "Is it really her?" Kincaid confirmed and explained the scientific process so they would understand the results could not be wrong. No random factor could lead to such an absolute DNA match. When the call ended, Kincaid returned to his office to finalize the case upgrade file. Instead of just a missing person case, Emily's file was now reclassified under Nevada's new legal standards: homicide investigation, unknown cause, unknown offender. This activated access to numerous data sources previously unavailable to cold cases, including the ability to obtain new search warrants, seize evidence related to suspects, and request advanced forensic analysis on all stored evidence. Kincaid compiled a list of evidence needing re-examination: Emily's jacket, purse, faint fingerprints on the door handle, soil samples from the two crime scenes, and of course, soil adhering to the bone crevices and items recovered at Lake Lahontan. He submitted a formal request to the lab for comprehensive testing, prioritizing evidence likely to contain touch DNA or soil fingerprints. The DNA results had transformed the case into a real criminal investigation, and Kincaid knew every subsequent step would rely on this scientific conclusion. Confirming Emily's death not only closed a painful chapter, but also opened a new phase, one where the question was no longer, is Emily still alive, but who brought her to her death and to Lake Lahontan. When the Emily Hartfield case was officially upgraded to a homicide investigation, Detective Aaron Kincaid immediately launched the next-generation forensic testing phase, a step the Fallon PD in 2007 could not have taken because the technology did not exist. His top priority was reanalyzing all evidence seized from Emily's home, especially the decayed fabric fragments, loose fibers, and the collar area of the maternity jacket Emily had left hanging in the house on the day she disappeared. These had previously been overlooked because they showed no visible traces. But under modern touch DNA technology, even minuscule epithelial cells could yield perpetrator traces. When the Reno Forensic Lab received the evidence, they immediately divided the fabric samples by likelihood of contact, high contact areas like the collar, shoulders, and sleeve cuffs, indirect contact areas like the body and inner wrists, and unidentified decayed fragments collected from the kitchen floor near the front door, leading to the porch. Each fabric piece was processed under strict protocol, mechanical cleaning with sterile tools, using specialized adhesive tape to collect epithelial cells, DNA extraction via micro-swab technique, then amplification in the lab's ultra-sensitive system. After more than 2 weeks, the analysis team noted a standout result on the collar of the maternity jacket, the area Emily would typically touch when putting it on, or where someone might grab it. 2 DNA profiles appeared, one belonging to Emily and the second to an unknown male individual. The report description stated clearly, foreign male DNA detected in low-copy sample, consistent with touch DNA from physical contact within short time frame prior to disappearance. This was the first breakthrough. However, to ensure legal validity, Kincaid requested comparison of the male profile against all individuals documented as being near Emily before her disappearance, including Ryan Talbot, family members, EMT colleagues, and 2 delivery workers who had visited her home in the prior month. The comparison results came back just 3 days later. The male DNA profile matched Ryan Talbot's sample, which was on file, because as a firefighter, he had been required to provide DNA before joining certain rescue units. The match was near absolute, ruling out any coincidence. More importantly, this DNA profile was found on Emily's jacket collar, a location that could only acquire touch DNA through close contact, typically involving pulling, holding, supporting, or restraining. The examiners also analyzed DNA fragmentation levels to estimate contact timing. They found the male DNA sample less degraded than Emily's on the same evidence, meaning it was deposited near the time the item ceased being used. That is, on or near the day Emily disappeared, not from older contact weeks prior. Per the expert opinion in the report, foreign male DNA consistent with recent contact, likely deposited within 24-48 hours prior to cessation of wear. This aligned perfectly with the family's statement that Emily had not seen Ryan for weeks before her disappearance, and any contact could only have occurred during the evening of November 21, 2007, the time Ryan claimed he did not touch Emily and only spoke briefly before leaving. Upon receiving the results, Kincaid immediately submitted the report to the Nevada Attorney General's office. He flagged it as evidence of direct physical contact inconsistent with witness statement, a legally powerful conclusion. Because if Ryan's statement was true, that he only stood a few steps away and left immediately, His touch DNA could not be on her collar. The DNA location indicated close, direct contact. The Reno Forensic Lab then analyzed 2 additional decayed fabric fragments recovered near the front door, previously dismissed as worthless debris. But when scanning for touch DNA on the surface, they found portions of the same male profile, still Ryan's. This reinforced the hypothesis that the contact occurred not just inside the house, but right near the front door, the location where Emily was last seen by a witness and where tracking dogs abruptly lost her scent in 2007. Kincaid synthesized 3 results: Ryan's touch DNA on Emily's collar, Ryan's touch DNA on the decayed fabric near the front door, and the absence of any other male DNA on close contact evidence. This formed a chain of evidence directly linking Ryan to forceful contact with the victim very near the time of her disappearance. From a legal standpoint, this evidence surpassed the threshold for suspicion. Kincaid concluded in the report, Ryan Talbot physically interacted with Emily Hartfield at or near the time of disappearance. Contact pattern inconsistent with benign interaction. Evidence suggests forceful or unexpected contact. These lines were marked as critical forensic finding, the most important forensic result in the entire investigation, and sufficient to elevate Ryan from person of interest to primary suspect. At the end of the report, Kincaid formally requested expanded forensic testing on remaining evidence and warrants for deeper tracing of all items, devices, and documents related to Ryan Talbot based on touch DNA that could not be explained by any innocent statement. Thus, for the first time in 14 years, science had advanced the case to pinpointing the perpetrator with high accuracy, and all traces pointed to one person, the last individual to see Emily Hartfield on the night she vanished. After the touch DNA established that Ryan Talbot had direct contact with Emily Hartfield immediately before her disappearance, Detective Aaron Kincaid continued focusing on the biggest weakness in Ryan's statement, his movements on the evening of November 21, 2007. Although the reconstructed timeline had already revealed numerous contradictions, to turn suspicion into legally sufficient evidence for charges, he needed an objective, undeniable data source. That was when he recalled a clue overlooked in the Carson City Fire Department's storage, a 2007-era GPS device that technician Brandon McCaffrey had inadvertently kept in a box of parts. In April 2021, as the new forensic testing program was progressing, Kincaid personally went to Carson City to check the old equipment storage, and McCaffrey led him to the box containing the GPS units once installed on fire engine E21, the vehicle Ryan commonly used in 2007. When opening the box, thick dust covering the devices made everyone assume nothing inside was usable. But when McCaffrey plugged the GPS into a backup power source, the screen flickered weakly but displayed the old Navigation OS logo, a sign that the internal compact flash card might still hold data. Kincaid immediately seized the device, sealed it with an official record, and took it to the Reno Forensic Digital Lab. In the first 3 weeks, technicians faced major difficulties reading the compact flash card, as most system files were corrupted, likely from a malfunction in 2007 that led to its decommissioning. However, during a low-level deep scan, they discovered a data partition not fully overwritten, one containing raw log files in TRK, IDIN formats, and a temporary system file time-stamped November 2007. The technicians used next-generation data recovery software to extract every remaining byte. Since this was a pre-encrypted GPS-era device, the stored information was completely in raw route form, recording coordinates per minute, along with time and speed. On the 23rd day after receiving the device, they recovered a small TRK file containing data from multiple days in November 2007, including the 21st, the day Emily disappeared. When Kincaid received the initial data sample, he immediately requested route analysis. The reconstruction system displayed each GPS point chronologically. 4:17 p.m. Fire engine E21 leaves Carson City Fire Station. 4:21 p.m. appears on the Highway 50 connector, 4:52 p.m., passes Silver Springs, 5:16 p.m., enters Fallon, and 5:22 p.m. Coordinates stop exactly 42 meters from Emily Hartfield's home, matching the location of the silver pickup truck seen by witnesses. When cross-referenced with 2007 camera data and witness statements, everything matched perfectly. This was the first evidence showing Ryan was not only in Fallon that evening, but present at the exact time Emily was last seen. But the more critical part appeared later in the log file. The data showed fire engine E21 leaving Fallon at 5:33 p.m., but instead of heading back to Carson as Ryan claimed, the log recorded the vehicle turning east, traveling along Highway 50 for 19 minutes, then turning onto a dirt road toward Lahontan Reservoir, 5:54 p.m. Vehicle stops near the North Shore area, 5:55, 6:07 p.m. Vehicle stationary for 12 minutes, 6:08 p.m. Vehicle continues deeper southwest, around Lake Lahontan, stopping again for 3 minutes, 6:12 p.m. Vehicle leaves the area, returns to Highway 50, 6:41 p.m., back in Carson. But instead of entering the fire station, it stops in the residential area near Ryan's apartment. Kincaid got chills looking at the satellite map reconstruction of the route. The fire engine E21 stops at Lake Lahontan, matched to the meter the area where Hunter Bill Corbett found Emily's bones in 2021. It was no longer hypothesis or inference. This was direct digital evidence proving Ryan was at the site where the victim's remains were found. As technicians continued analyzing the log file, they noted the vehicle traveled at 812 miles per hour in the off-road section, speeds typical for driving on soft dirt or difficult terrain. This indicated the driver deliberately took the vehicle into an unmarked area, fully consistent with the later determined body disposal site. The GPS data also showed the first stop duration at the primary discovery scene, long enough for the perpetrator to drag or carry the body from the truck bed to the low brush area. The alignment of time, location, and witness Mark Ellison's statement, who saw a silver pickup in the same area during a similar time frame, made the evidence chain absolutely consistent. When Kincaid incorporated the GPS data into the reconstructed timeline, the entire event picture became clear. Ryan requests shift relief at the right moment. Leaves the station at 4:17, arrives in Fallon at 5:16, appears at Emily's home at 5:22, leaves at 5:33, does not head to Carson, but detours to Lahontan, stops long enough to handle the body, and returns to Carson avoiding the shell camera by taking the southern bypass. This was the explanation for the unaccounted-for gap that had persisted for 14 years. Kincaid immediately prepared a 32-page digital forensic report, submitted it to the Nevada Attorney General's office, and requested the GPS device be added to the key evidence list, as it met all three legal criteria: objective data unverifiable after 2007, direct link of the suspect to the body location, and complete destruction of the alibi statement. With the GPS log, touch DNA, reconstructed timeline, and witness Mark Ellison's statement, all the scattered pieces from over a decade finally locked into a complete picture. A picture showing that Ryan Talbot was the last person with Emily, the one who took her to Lahontan, and the one who left after concealing her body. When the GPS data was recovered, and the touch DNA results placed Ryan Talbot at the center of suspicion, with an undeniable level of certainty, Detective Aaron Kincaid knew that the time had come for the third interrogation, 14 years after the day Emily Hartfield disappeared. This interrogation was not aimed at getting Ryan to confess, but at assessing his behavior, physiological reactions, ability to control his statements, and willingness to confront the evidence, thereby determining the next legal step. Kincaid sent a valid summons, accompanied by an invitation for Ryan to come to the Reno PD, to clarify updates related to the case. Ryan showed up on time, but his presence was markedly different from the first interview in 2007, quieter. His face tense, his eyes avoiding contact from the moment he entered the room. He came alone, without a lawyer, an unusual point, because Ryan had never before faced such strong forensic evidence. As the interrogation began, Kincaid neutrally recapped the general context. The case had been reopened, there were new discoveries, and the timeline needed confirmation. But when asked about basic points, Ryan barely responded. The simple question, "What were you doing in Fallon on the evening of November 21, 2007, received a curt reply, "I don't remember." When Kincaid asked, "Do you remember meeting Emily Hartfield that evening?" Ryan answered, "I think so," or "No, I'm not sure." This ambiguity was in complete contrast to his 2007 statement, when he described the meeting as clearly lasting 10-15 minutes. Kincaid moved on to the key point. "Did you touch Emily that night? Any contact at all?" Ryan looked down at the table, clenched his hands, but did not answer. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it. There was only a silence, lasting more than 18 seconds. A non-logical response by investigative behavioral standards, because innocent people typically react quickly and decisively to questions involving violent behavior. Kincaid continued, "Your touch DNA was found on Emily's collar." Ryan closed his eyes for a second, then opened them with an unreadable expression. But what he said was completely illogical. "I don't know. It could be old." Kincaid pointed out, "This collar was analyzed for DNA degradation levels. Your DNA mark is much fresher than Emily's. It was deposited close to the time she went missing." Ryan did not refute it. He only replied, "I don't know anything about science." This was a contradictory behavioral response. Instead of denying or providing exculpatory information, he evaded by downplaying his knowledge, a tactic Kincaid had seen in many suspects trying to reduce confrontation. When the interrogation shifted to the GPS data, Kincaid displayed the map on the screen, showing the route of fire engine E21 that evening, from Carson to Fallon, then from Fallon to the exact area of Lake Lahontan, where Emily's bones were found. When he asked, "How do you explain your vehicle being here, at the exact location where the body was found?" Ryan frowned, but did not look at the screen. He repeated one phrase, "I'm not sure. I don't remember." The fire engine could be used by multiple people, but when Kincaid asked, "So who was using E21 that day if not you?" Ryan fell silent. This silence lasted long enough that Kincaid had to note it in the interrogation report as non-logical behavior. No rebuttal when faced with direct incriminating evidence. When Kincaid presented the GPS timestamp, 5:22 p.m. stop at Emily's house, Ryan lowered his head to the table and sighed but offered no rebuttal. This was assessed as passive admission, a type of reaction often seen when a suspect knows denial is impossible, but is not ready to confess. The strangest part came with the key question, "Did you harm Emily?" Instead of a strong denial like an innocent person, or a defensive response like someone merely suspected, Ryan simply said, "I have nothing to say." From an investigative behavioral perspective, this is the most damaging response a suspect can give. It neither denies nor explains, but only attempts to distance himself from the responsibility of answering, something often seen when a person facing evidence has no logical defense left. In the post-interrogation behavioral assessment, Kincaid wrote, "The suspect did not deny any evidence. There was no statement affirming innocence. All responses were evasive, vague, illogical, and inconsistent." This is the typical behavioral pattern of a suspect facing undeniable forensic data. Kincaid also noted that Ryan never asked the basic questions an innocent person typically would, such as, "What did you find? Why do you suspect me? That can't be my vehicle. How could my DNA be there?" This lack of pushback indicated Ryan was not trying to restore an image of innocence, but only attempting to minimize confrontation by blurring boundaries of time, actions, and memory. When the interrogation ended, Ryan asked to leave, without scheduling a follow-up, without requesting to review the evidence again, and without any action affirming an innocent stance. This was a serious anomaly in behavioral investigative assessment, leading Kincaid to conclude that Ryan was no longer a contradictory witness, but had fully shifted into the pattern of a suspect trying to avoid engagement. The third interrogation, though without a confession, completed the behavioral picture. Ryan Talbot did not deny his presence in Fallon, did not deny contact with Emily, did not deny the GPS route to Lahontan, and did not deny any incriminating point. This, according to modern behavioral investigative standards, is one of the most damaging factors for a suspect entering the phase of building a prosecution file. After the third interrogation, when Ryan Talbot evaded every question, denied no incriminating evidence, and fully displayed the behavioral pattern of a suspect facing undeniable proof, Detective Aaron Kincaid immediately began preparing documents to request an arrest warrant. The file he submitted to the Nevada Attorney General's office and the Churchill County Judge included 3 core lines of evidence: recovered GPS data from fire engine E21, touch DNA results, confirming Ryan's close contact with Emily right around the time she disappeared, and a minute-by-minute reconstructed timeline proving Ryan's initial statements were completely false. All this data, combined with the location where Emily's bones and necklace were found at Lake Lahontan, exactly where GPS recorded Ryan's vehicle, formed a closed logical chain, fully meeting the legal requirements for an arrest warrant in a long-dormant homicide case. In the petition, over 50 pages long, Kincaid analyzed each part clearly. GPS placed Ryan in Fallon at the exact time Emily was last seen. GPS also showed the vehicle turning toward Lahontan Reservoir right afterward and stopping at the precise spot where the bones were found. Ryan's DNA was on Emily's jacket collar and on a decayed fabric fragment at the front door of the victim's home, proving direct contact. The timeline showed Ryan could not have been in Carson as he claimed. And finally, the third interrogation revealed Ryan no longer offered any reasonable defense. When the Churchill County Judge reviewed the file, she signed the arrest warrant less than 3 hours after receiving the request, a rare speed for cold cases over a decade old. The warrant was issued on the morning of June 18, 2021, with initial charges including homicide, murder with malice, improper disposal of human remains, and obstruction by providing false information. Once the warrant was approved, Kincaid contacted Carson City PD and the Carson City Fire Department to coordinate a safe arrest. The task force decided to execute the arrest at the Carson Fire Station to avoid the risk of Ryan fleeing or destroying documents at his home. On the morning of June 19th, as the morning shift was handing over duties, 2 Carson PD patrol cars and 1 unmarked vehicle from the Reno Cold Case Unit pulled up in front of the fire station. Kincaid led the way, carrying the stamped arrest warrant. As he entered the main building, Ryan was standing near the equipment repair area, wearing his radio on his shoulder and talking to colleagues. In that moment, as the station's sliding door opened and Kincaid approached, the atmosphere in the room immediately tensed. Some firefighters had heard rumors that Emily's disappearance case had been reopened, but no one believed their colleague. A man long seen as a quiet, non-confrontational employee could become a homicide suspect. Kincaid stopped 2 meters from Ryan and read aloud, "Ryan Talbot, you are under arrest pursuant to a warrant from Churchill County Court for the murder of Emily Hartfield on November 21, 2007. Ryan stood frozen, his hands trembling slightly but offering no resistance. He just looked at Kincaid, saying nothing, not asking why, not denying it, and not immediately requesting a lawyer, a reaction that caused the other officers in the room to step back, bewildered as to why an innocent person would remain silent in the face of such a serious accusation. As the handcuffs were locked around Ryan's wrists, 3 of his colleagues, who had worked shifts and fought fires alongside him for years, stood as if turned to stone. One exclaimed, "No way, Ryan isn't that kind of person." Another, his face pale, asked Kincaid, "Is there some mistake?" Kincaid simply replied, "We have clear evidence. This is the necessary step." News of Ryan's arrest spread through the station in minutes. Some firefighters watched from the hallway in stunned silence. Others looked at the floor as if avoiding their colleagues' gaze. For them, Seeing someone in the same life-saving uniform handcuffed for murder was a shock hard to accept. As Ryan was led out of the station, a group of Carson City residents, who had heard rumors via internal radio and local social media, gathered outside. They watched Ryan being escorted away without struggling, without protesting innocence, without shouting a single word in his own defense. An older woman whispered, "Did he really do it?" A man shouted as if in disbelief, "It's Ryan," meaning all this time he was here, living normally. Videos recorded by residents on their phones spread across local Facebook groups within hours, accompanied by hundreds of comments filled with confusion, anger, and disbelief. Some defended Ryan, saying there must be some mistake. But the majority, especially those who had followed the Emily case since 2007, saw the arrest as the turning point they had waited years for. As the patrol car took Ryan away from Carson Fire Station, Kincaid sat in the unmarked vehicle, following behind, clearly sensing the shift in the investigation's atmosphere. For 14 years, the Emily Hartfield case had hung between disappearance and suspicion, lacking enough evidence to move forward. But now, the chain of modern forensic evidence, combined with GPS data and Ryan's abnormal behavior, had pushed the entire file into a new phase. The phase where the truth would finally have to face the light. The trial of Ryan Talbot began in late February 2022 at Churchill County Court under intense media coverage in Nevada, as it was one of the rare homicide cases brought to trial without a fully intact body, only scattered bones pieced together with a chain of forensic evidence after more than 14 years. Right from the opening statements, prosecutor Clara Hensley presented a tightly logical case strategy, guiding the jury from initial suspicion to an undeniable conclusion about Ryan's role in Emily Hartfield's death. She began by describing the 2007 timeline. Emily arrived home at 4:55 p.m., a silver pickup appeared in front of her door at 5:22 p.m., and no one saw her again after that. The prosecution emphasized that Ryan's entire account of a brief and insignificant presence did not match any objective data. She presented the timeline, reconstructed by Detective Kincaid, showing how Ryan's self-reported timestamps did not align with reality. From claiming he left Carson earlier than he did, to saying he left Fallon at exactly 5:30 p.m., when cameras and traffic maps showed that would be impossible if he returned to Carson as claimed. The prosecution used this timeline evidence as the first foundation to prove Ryan intended to conceal his true route. Next, the prosecution presented Ryan's shift schedule at the Carson Fire Department on the day Emily disappeared. The 2007 time clock system showed Ryan suddenly requested leave at 4:12 p.m. for a personal emergency, something the prosecution described as a logically abnormal point because no one at the station knew of any personal issue, and he later could not explain the reason when questioned in 2021. The prosecution used this detail to show Ryan left his shift with premeditated intent, not due to an unexpected situation. As the jury absorbed this basic inconsistency, the prosecution moved to the strongest legal blow: GPS data from fire engine E21, the vehicle Ryan himself used in 2007. The prosecution displayed on the courtroom screen the map of the recovered GPS route from the compact flashcard, recreating the entire journey that evening. When the prosecutor pointed to the 5:22 p.m. coordinate, where the vehicle stopped right in front of Emily's house, several jury members immediately bowed their heads to take notes. The prosecution continued with GPS evidence showing the vehicle left Fallon at 5:33 p.m., but did not head back to Carson as Ryan claimed. Instead, it turned toward Lahontan Reservoir, stopping at the exact area where Emily's bones were found. This evidence was described as a direct, undeniable link between the suspect and the body disposal site, a statement that left the entire courtroom silent. After GPS, the prosecution shifted to DNA evidence, touched DNA found on the collar of Emily's jacket and on a decayed fabric fragment at the front door. The prosecution called a forensic technician to testify, explaining that Ryan's DNA could not be present in those locations if he had only stood at the door and talked for a few minutes. As he claimed, the placement reflected direct, likely forceful contact. The prosecution concluded Ryan Talbot was the last person to have contact with Emily, and the level of contact is inconsistent with a harmless meeting. Next, the prosecution focused on motive, an element often hard to establish in cases without witnesses. Based on statements from Emily's family and friends, along with pregnancy confirmation documents, the prosecution argued that Ryan sought to avoid responsibility for Emily's pregnancy and did not want the child's arrival to affect his reputation and firefighting career. The prosecution noted Ryan had repeatedly tried to keep this secret from colleagues and family, creating pressure for him. The prosecution did not claim this was the sole motive, but described it as the factor creating the greatest conflict between the two. After presenting motive, the prosecution introduced additional evidence of Ryan's abnormal behavior after Emily's disappearance, not participating in searches, not checking on her family, despite knowing them for years, avoiding police contact, and especially his detached, confused, vague statements after 14 years. The prosecution stressed that innocent people do not behave this way in a disappearance lasting over a decade. In closing her presentation, the prosecution linked all lines of evidence into a closed logical chain: false time log, abnormal shift schedule, GPS, confirming true route, DNA confirming contact, body found at exact GPS point, motive to avoid responsibility, abnormal post-disappearance behavior. She concluded, not a single point in Ryan Talbot's statements matches objective data. Conversely, all forensic data aligns with each other and points in only one direction. When it was their turn, Ryan's defense attorney attempted to counter with the only viable strategy left, attacking the prosecution's biggest weakness: the inability to determine a specific cause of death due to the non-intact body. The defense argued that the bones had scattered over years. It was impossible to know how Emily died. There were no signs of fractures from forceful impact, and therefore, any conclusion of homicide is speculation. They emphasized, no cause of death means no murder conviction beyond reasonable doubt. The defense also attacked the GPS data, claiming the old device could have recording errors and that fire engines were sometimes used by multiple personnel. However, they could not provide a list of others who were in the vehicle that evening. When challenging DNA, they tried to argue touch DNA could be old contact, but were countered by the prosecution's degradation analysis. The defense also attempted to frame Ryan's silence as exercising his right to self-protection, but lacked a reasonable explanation for his never denying even once. Despite vigorous efforts, most jurors noted that the defense failed to provide a plausible alternative theory. By the end of the day, everyone understood that the trial was not about finding an intact body. It was about proving an undeniable forensic logical chain. When the prosecution and defense completed their final arguments, the Churchill County judge handed the case to the 12-member jury for deliberations, a phase that left the entire Fallon and Carson City communities holding their breath, as the verdict would not only decide Ryan Talbot's fate, but also end 14 years of pain for Emily Hartfield's family. The jury was taken to a private room, bringing all materials: GPS maps, DNA reports, shift logs, reconstructed timeline, witness statements, and transcripts of Ryan's interrogations. In the first 6 hours, they focused on evaluating 3 key lines of evidence. First, the travel route on the evening of November 21, 2007. Second, the DNA, and third, Ryan's behavior before and after Emily's disappearance. They reviewed the map, showing the GPS route, especially the 5:22 p.m. point in front of Emily's house and the 5:54 p.m. point at the bone discovery area, and quickly agreed there was no reasonable alternative explanation other than Ryan driving to the locations directly tied to the crime. They also re-examined the shift log to check if Ryan could have left the station later or earlier, but all data showed he proactively requested leave at the exact time leading to his appearance in Fallon. This could not be coincidence. The jury then moved to assessing the touch DNA. They requested to review the forensic technician's testimony again, which confirmed Ryan's DNA appeared on Emily's collar, under conditions that could only occur near the time she disappeared, not from old contact. They cross-referenced this with family statements that Emily had not seen Ryan for weeks prior to her disappearance. This led some jurors to note, if the DNA is in a place Ryan said he didn't touch, his statement cannot be believed. When evaluating Ryan's behavior in the third interrogation, the jury reviewed the recording where he remained silent when confronted with evidence and gave vague responses like, "I don't know, I don't remember," or "I have nothing to say." Many members felt an innocent person would react very differently to such serious accusations. In the 10th hour of deliberations, the group focused on the most critical legal question, whether there was sufficient basis to conclude Emily was murdered under the beyond reasonable doubt standard, overcoming all reasonable doubt, even though the cause of death could not be determined due to the non-intact body. The prosecution had provided a clear framework. Exact mechanism of death is not required if the suspect's actions led to the victim's disappearance, death, and concealment, combined with evidence of the suspect's presence at the scene and forceful contact with the victim. When comparing these factors to Nevada law, the jury determined the case fully met the criteria for first-degree murder, with aggravating circumstances due to the victim being pregnant. After completing internal discussions, the jury foreperson conducted a secret ballot. The first vote showed 11/12 members agreeing on guilty for first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping, with one holdout requesting to review the GPS data again to ensure the device had no errors. They re-examined the full data recovery report for nearly an hour, and after hearing the technician explain the file log integrity once more, that member changed their vote. The second ballot achieved unanimous consensus. The jury returned to the courtroom at 5:43 p.m., where the gallery was packed, Emily's family seated in the front row, while Ryan's former colleagues stood silently in the back. When the judge asked the foreperson if a verdict had been reached, he stood, holding the paper with the decision, his voice low but firm. "We, the jury, after examining all the evidence, find the defendant Ryan Talbot guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping." The courtroom fell silent for several seconds, as if all sound had been drained from the air, before Emily's mother's choked sobs broke through. Ryan showed no strong reaction, no shouting, no outrage. He only looked down at the table, his hands clenched tightly. Some of his former colleagues bowed their heads. Others stared straight at Ryan, as if trying to understand how someone they once trusted could end up in this position. As the judge confirmed the verdict and ordered Ryan remanded into custody, pending sentencing, many in the courtroom understood that the disappearance that shook Fallon in 2007 had reached its most significant legal conclusion. The Nevada jury had officially determined that Emily Hartfield did not disappear due to accident or voluntarily, but was murdered and taken to Lake Lahontan by the very man who had denied any responsibility. The sentencing hearing for Ryan Talbot took place on the morning of April 12, 2022, at the Churchill County Courthouse, in an atmosphere of rare heaviness, even for a case that had dragged on for 14 years. After the jury found Ryan guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping, the final decision rested with Judge Melissa Grant, known for her strict sentences in homicide cases involving concealment of a body. The courtroom was packed with no empty seats, as the communities of Fallon and Carson City had followed the disappearance of Emily Hartfield since 2007 and viewed this sentencing as the end of a long, painful chapter. Emily's family sat in the front row, as they had in every previous hearing, Sarah, Emily's sister, clutching her mother's hand tightly, while Mr. Richard Hartfield, the usually reserved father, appeared for the first time with eyes that could not hide his exhaustion, mixed with a slight relief that the truth had finally been proven in court. When Ryan was escorted into the courtroom, a low murmur rippled through the room. He wore an orange prison jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front, his face expressionless, but his eyes much more sunken than on the day of his arrest. His silence persisted throughout the hearing, just as it had during his third interrogation and the entire trial, which many observers described as a silence that generated no sympathy whatsoever. Prosecutor Clara Hensley began by recounting the charges confirmed by the jury. Ryan Talbot murdered Emily Hartfield, a pregnant woman, then transported her body to a remote area near Lahontan Reservoir to conceal it. This act not only took the life of a young mother, but also robbed another life of the chance to be born. She emphasized that Ryan had 14 years to tell the truth or cooperate, but instead chose silence, concealment, and to let Emily's family live in a mix of hope and despair. At the same time, she urged the court to impose the maximum sentence under Nevada law, life imprisonment without parole. Following the prosecution was the victim impact statements from the family. Sarah stood up first, her voice trembling but clear. She spoke of the years of desperate searching, sleepless nights, and treks into the Nevada desert just to find a small trace of her sister. She said, "Emily is not just a name in a missing persons file. My sister was a real person, someone about to become a mother. For 14 years, we didn't know where she was, couldn't bury her, couldn't say goodbye. The person responsible for that is standing before the court today." Emily's mother, Karen, was unable to stand and speak, so she submitted a handwritten letter to the judge, in which she wrote, "No sentence will ever be enough to bring Emily back, but please ensure that the person who did this never has the opportunity to do the same to anyone else." Ryan was given the opportunity for a final statement as per procedure, but just as throughout the trial, he only said, "I have nothing to say." No apology, no denial, no plea for mercy. And it was precisely this emptiness that led many in the courtroom to view him as having no shred of humanity left for Emily or her family. When all sides had spoken, Judge Melissa Grant held the sentence, looked directly at Ryan, and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "The jury has concluded that you are responsible for the death of Emily Hartfield. The evidence presented in court shows that you intentionally lured, controlled, murdered, and concealed her body. For over 14 years, you chose silence, allowing the victim's family to live in pain. Those actions demonstrate cruelty and a complete disregard for human life." She paused for a moment, and no one in the courtroom dared to breathe heavily. Under Nevada law, and based on the severity of the offenses, the court sentences you, Ryan Talbot, to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the charge of first-degree murder. Additionally, for the charge of first-degree kidnapping, the court sentences you to 15 years to life, to be served consecutively with the first sentence. A sigh mixed with sobs came from Emily's family side, while on the side of the Carson Fire Department, where some of Ryan's former colleagues were present, many bowed their heads, as if unable to accept that someone who had once been a firefighter was receiving the heaviest sentence in Nevada's justice system. Ryan remained standing still, his face impassive, showing no reaction, not even a frown. The escorting officer placed a hand on his shoulder, signaling to lead him out of the courtroom. He turned his back and walked away, his cuffed hand swaying lightly with his steps, and that was the last time the public saw Ryan Talbot outside of prison. That same afternoon, Ryan was transferred to the Central Intake Facility of the Nevada Department of Corrections in Carson City for classification processing, then moved to Ely State Prison, one of the state's maximum security prisons where inmates serving life without parole are held. The life without parole sentence for Ryan Talbot closed a 14-year journey from disappearance, despair, to discovery, struggle, and finally justice. But for many in the Fallon and Carson communities, especially Emily Hartfield's family, this was not a complete ending, only the moment they could release some of the waiting, allowing Emily to finally rest in peace. 1 month after the life without parole sentence was handed down to Ryan Talbot, Fallon and Carson City were still reeling from the aftershocks of a case that had seemed forgotten for over a decade. Emily Hartfield's family decided to hold a small but dignified memorial service at Oates Park, where Emily had once participated in community fundraising events while working as an EMT. The service took place on a lightly sunny afternoon in early May, when the wind from the Nevada desert rustled through the trees, making the leaves whisper. More than 200 people attended: family, friends, Emily's former EMT colleagues, Fallon residents, and even some who had joined the search efforts in 2007. At the center of the memorial area, the family placed a large photo of Emily, her simple, gentle smile, the resilient eyes of a 27-year-old woman preparing to enter a new chapter of life before it was brutally cut short. Next to it, they placed a small wooden symbol labeled Baby Hartfield, the child who never got to be born. During the service, Emily's sister Sarah spoke with choked emotion. "We lost my sister 14 years ago. We didn't know what happened, didn't know where she was, didn't know if she was in pain. Today, we can finally stand here and say that Emily has been found and justice has been served. But the price we paid lasted 14 years. Many attendees shed tears, not because of the recent legal verdict, but because they deeply felt what the family had endured. The silence of the case file, the vast desert, with no answers, the endless waiting that stretched time like it was being torn apart. A small memorial table was set near the path, where people wrote notes on pieces of paper for Emily. "We never forgot you. Fallon always remembers Emily. Thank you for your service to the community. You deserve to rest in peace." In Carson City, the firefighting community was hit harder than anywhere else. They lost faith in a colleague, once seen as reliable, but they also felt a profound sense of betrayal, not toward the profession, but toward the values they believed every firefighter should represent: saving lives, protecting the community, never causing harm. After the sentence, the Carson Fire Department held an all-hands meeting to discuss the incident, ways to recognize abnormal behavior in colleagues, and measures to improve internal procedures to ensure the organization would never be exploited by someone abusing their position like Ryan. Some who had worked with Ryan shared that they could not imagine him capable of something so horrific. His silence in the early years, and the fact that he continued working fire shifts as if nothing had happened, left many even more stunned. For Fallon residents, the case became a painful lesson about the fragility of small communities, where everyone knows everyone, and no one thinks evil could come from someone familiar. Many who lived near Emily recounted that for years, whenever they passed the small house where she once lived, they always felt something unfinished, as if the story was still open, without resolution. Now, with the legal conclusion, light had shone into the deepest shadows of the case, but the sense of loss remained. Legally, Emily Hartfield's file was officially closed at the end of May 2022. Judge Grant signed the closure order with the note, "Cold case resolved, perpetrator convicted." The court, the Reno Cold Case Unit, and Fallon PD jointly signed a comprehensive report over 200 pages long, documenting the entire 14-year investigation, from the futile desert searches in 2007 to the modern forensic breakthroughs in 2021. This report was later used in statewide cold case investigation training programs to give hope to other long-unsolved missing persons cases. In the Fallon PD evidence locker, Emily's belongings, the silver necklace found at Lahontan, her maternity jacket, and some items from her home were requested back by the family. They held a small ceremony beside Lahontan Reservoir, where some of Emily's ashes were scattered into the water to return her to the place where the last traces of her were found. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt that after 14 years, Emily Hartfield had finally been brought back to where she belonged. The end of the case was not satisfaction, but release from a painful loop that had lasted so long. Fallon and Carson will remember this case for many years to come, as a reminder that time can bury the truth, but it cannot erase the journey to reclaim justice. Emily's family, after so many winters of waiting, could finally set down part of their burden, believing that her story was no longer forgotten in the darkness, and that those who loved her could move forward, carrying memories of Emily as an inseparable part of this community. The story of Emily Hartfield and her family's 14-year journey to find the truth reflects many issues still present in American life today. The fragility of small communities, the limitations of initial missing persons investigations, and the importance of modern forensic technology in breaking through years of silence. Emily's case shows that in reality, many missing persons cases in the U.S., especially in states with vast terrain like Nevada, Arizona, or New Mexico, are not upgraded to criminal investigations simply due to a lack of initial signs of violence. In Emily's case, the Fallon police in 2007 failing to find the body, identify signs of foul play, and lacking forensic tools like touch DNA or GPS data recovery caused the case to go dormant for years. This reminds us that sometimes, in real life, the truth is not hidden because someone is too clever, but because the system lacks the means to see clearly what lies beneath the surface. Another lesson comes from Emily's family. Their persistence was not just emotional, but practically valuable. Their keeping of Emily's belongings, detailed notes on Ryan's abnormalities, and continued pressure on the legal system ensured her file was not forgotten. This reflects a reality in the United States. Many cold cases are only reopened because the victim's family refuses to give up. From a community perspective, the shock at Carson Fire Station, when a colleague was arrested, shows that violence does not only occur in remote places or extreme circumstances. Sometimes the perpetrator is the person trusted most. Therefore, Americans today can draw an important lesson. Do not ignore unusual signals in the behavior of those around you, especially in relationships involving power imbalances or control. And finally, the emergence of modern forensic technology shows that no matter how long the truth is buried, science can bring it back to light. This also sends a clear message to American society. Justice may be slow, but it is not always silent, and when family, community, and science stand together for the truth, even cases lasting 14 years can be resolved. Thank you for following the entire journey to reclaim justice for Emily Hartfield. If you found the story meaningful, please hit subscribe so you don't miss other cases solved after years that seemed hopeless. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore truths brought to light after long periods of darkness.